Well, good evening. In tonight's episode, we're going to talk about training and how critical it is. If you want to be successful in any level of farming, you will have to become educated. Spending a lifetime of continuous education is the key to success. It's expensive in some cases, it's a lot of work, but it pays unbelievable benefits. I've had the good fortune of going to hundreds and hundreds, probably into the thousands of classes over the years. And I take advantage of everything I can within my budget and my time that I have. I highly suggest you do the same thing. Well, just recently I had a chance to go to a biological farming product training. It was awesome. I've been to this before. Each time they take out a new area, I get a lot out of it. Grant you, maybe I could teach part of this class because I have had a lot of experience. But every time I go to a class, I learn something new. And in this case, I learned a lot new. And I'm changing up some farming methods based on this. There's a little gem inside there that I took note of that I'm going to be applying. We're actually working on a design here shortly to get the biologicals in the ground so I don't have to compete as much as I had to with the sunlight. Well, anyways, Keith Montgomery is the presenter from Zone. It's a long presentation, so hang on to your hat, get some popcorn, and enjoy. But there is a lot to learn. So we'll see you on the other side.
We talk about there's two main different categories of plants. You get your monocots and your dicots. There's your main two categories that way, okay? When we think about monocots, those are you raise corn, those that has a single endosperm in the seed, those that tends to come up as a spike per se. Okay, we look at the list over here, there's a few things over there that you may not necessarily have thought was a monocot. You get down here like garlics and onions and daffodils, those are all considered monocots also, all right? This is some of the characteristics that's typical of monocots. Something that's kind of interesting when you start talking about a monocot that produces a flower. The petals are always in multiples of 3. So the petals on the leaf on a monocot will always be 3, 6, 9, 12, up through that way, okay? See a picture here of corn. Typical as far as all of you realize on how corn comes up. And we have the root system is more of a fibrous root system that way. Then we get dicots. These are typically what we think about as legume plants. We talk about alfalfa, soybeans, clover. Get into the vegetables, broccoli, cauliflower, cucumbers are also all dicots also. Not all dicots, and where this kind of ties in when I'm throwing this in here is some dicots, being those in the legume family of the dicots, is a host for bacteria, what we typically think about as far as nodulization on the root system that way, okay? When we think about a dicot, they're going to have more of a taproot type of a system. And also, if they flower, they're going to have petals in multiples of 4 and 5. All right? Now, one other thing about the difference between a lot of your dicots and your monocots, the dicots is going to have more of a branching type of a leaf. Think about a soybean leaf where you have your main vein in the leaf and it branching out. Corn leaf's not that way, is it? That's kind of the difference. Now, in relationship to microbes, there's the beginning of the title, between microbes and hormones, plant hormones. When we think about that in a relationship of how microbes interact with plants is kind of unique. When you get a dicot, there's particular families that will technically infect the root system of a legume plant, which we call nodules as farmers, that we want to see, knowing that that means that we're producing nitrogen that way. It's a very unique system that way, how that does that. Monocots cannot do that, okay? So, Matthew 4:4, short of it, man shall not live by bread alone. A lot of you have heard that quoted. Also along the same lines, neither do plants grow by fertilizer alone. And I realize a lot of this group here realizes that just applying pounds of NPK is not what is really making production within plants and what plants is doing. There's way more to that. And there's more talk of that now, even in more mainstream, even conferences. We was up here talking about a conference up here, and I hear people even, it's interesting for me to look at, we have a big Mid-South conference. Matter of fact, I think it's next week down in Memphis, Tennessee. It's going to be interesting if they get all the snow cleared out of the way for the conference. That it's rice and cotton and corn is the main things that conference goes over. And I've been keeping up with that conference for 30 years now. It's amazing in the last 2 years, because they go through and list out the schedule of who the speakers is going to be and what the tentative topics is going to be. It's interesting how the topics at even that conference has been altering some over the last 5 years, where they're talking more about soil life, carbon, and things like that 30 years ago, that was all the terms they used. Snake oil thinking, that people that did that, you can't raise a crop with just dealing with biologicals, is what mainstream commercial thinking was in the past. So I'm going to go back to this chart a few times. This is actually out of a page that the USDA put out about 25 years ago. It's called the Soil Food Web book, and it's a really good chart in showing our different levels in relationship to soil life, and how we have our primary, the first level, our plants, either live plants or dead plants or organic matter. And then we get our second level, our bacteria, fungi, and nematodes. Okay? And as we go up this chain, per se, of how things are interacting, that some of these are preying on the level below them, at how the soil life process is functioning. Okay? Now, a while ago I was talking about the relationship with the legume plants. We get that process when two living substances is interacting is called a symbiotic relationship. When we have two living things, whether it's a bacteria and a fungus, or a plant and a bacteria, or even a plant and a nematode, these are interactions. And there's three main forms that we have of these symbiotic relationships. The first one I have listed there, probably everybody's can relate to as far as with, if you have livestock, is parasites. That's two living substances. If we have a parasite and we have a cow, that is how we have two living substances interacting, but the one is living in or on the other, which derives nourishment and harms the host. Okay? That's the parasite action. Then we get the second one there is mutualism, where two species live in close association with one another and both benefit. I'm going to use an example of a soybean plant. We get rhizobium bacteria that infects that root of that plant and creates, in lack of better terms, a tumor on that root, which we call a nodule. The bacteria is benefited from the plant. It's getting some sugars and some energy from the plant. And at the same time, the bacteria is taking nitrogen into gas from the air and making nitrates, which it feeds to the plant. Okay? That's what mutualism. Both of them has benefited from that relationship. The bottom one being competition. Now, being farmers, I don't have to explain much of competition when we start talking about weeds in a corn crop, or we talk about weeds and a soybean plant. That's the competition factor, to where we're in a living environment to where technically both are harmed. I mean, if you just have weeds with no corn crop, they'll be a lot bigger than if they're in competition with that corn through the growing season. Usually we think about it the other way around, how they're hurting the corn, but both are hurt, okay? So I'm going to focus more on this mutualism here as we go through this and think about this as far as the relationship that happens between the two. Now, this is another chart out of that Soil Web book as far as where we're looking at. You look at the list, I hope that's clear. We get algae and we get mosses, we get roots, and we get all these different substances, and that's working with like our mycorrhiza fungi, and here's our bacteria, some of the shredders, and then we get the next level of those that are preying on the level underneath those. But it's the life process of how things work. Some things as far as how these nutrients that are actually becoming available, like nitrogen fixing bacteria. You get these nitrogen fixing bacteria, as long as that bacteria is still alive, that nitrogen is not available to a plant. It's going to have to die, and for the next level of fungi or something else to consume that bacteria, and there's excess nitrogen, and then that's what's released back for a plant to be able to use. Does that make sense? Now, when we think about bacteria, and I hear this a lot, especially when we talking about like the Infix product that we have, that, and my box didn't get packed with me. I had an empty box of Infix that I've been using for meetings I've been doing. That's why I'm kind of doing this. That you get this box, 5-pound container of Infix, and Brian comes out or I come out and say, okay, this is enough to cover 50 acres. Well, you get some people, they're like, you're pulling my leg, right? You're only going to put 1 pound per 10 acres, or 1.6 ounces, which is, what is that? 2 tablespoons over a whole acre. You're going to get 2 tablespoons, we're going to go out here and sprinkle it over an acre that way, and that's going to make a difference on a corn crop? I hear that a lot. But if we look at and this slide didn't come up right because the left-hand side was supposed to come up first and then the second. When we look at what I have as the bad guys listed here, some of these you may recognize when we start talking about different bacteria. We get the bacteria Pythium, which causes early season corn rot of the root system, all the way affecting that corn plant up to mid-whorl stage, okay? We look at the next one. Xanthomanos is a legume bacterial leaf spot. It's what creates a leaf spot in a soybean plant. We look at the bottom one here, Phytophthora, which is what starts crown rot in a strawberry plant. Now, when we start talking about these bacteria, I don't have to convince you that leaf spot on soybeans is going to hurt the yields on soybeans, or that crown rot in strawberries can completely wipe out a stand of strawberries. When we think about the aspects, when I bring this up, when we think about what these bacteria can do, if we're not organic, we're quick to say, hey man, I need to get a fungicide out here and I've got to get this taken care of and stopped, or I'm going to lose my corn crop. Why is it that we understand the concept that a bacteria can wipe out my crop, but on the other hand, we question whether that a bacteria can produce nitrogen for that same corn crop? See what I'm saying? We kind of get a mindset that, well, the bad guys can wipe it out, but I don't know if these good guys can actually do enough to make a substantial difference in bacteria. But we realize, we acknowledge this side, but we have a hard time with this side. Brian?
Well, the example I like to use is, when you first look at the entrance and what it can do, it is hard to grasp. But yet you go on the other side and you don't have any trouble looking at a herbicide where we use 1 ounce per acre and it will take care of all your broadleaves. So you look at that scenario, something that's going to destroy something at 1 ounce per acre, and say, yeah, we know that happens. So again, why can't the reverse happen? We can have some of these very beneficial things, and if we use them at very low rates, they're gonna be, instead of on the negative side, they're gonna be very positive.
We do the same thing with on human health. We can get, let's say, if you go out and eat and you get a bad egg, give you food poisoning, could almost kill you. But then we want to say, well, you want me to take this little capsule of this probiotic that's got good bacteria and it's going to help me? I don't know about that. I don't know if I want to take that. But we don't have any trouble convincing anybody that if you get one bad egg, you can be sick for days. Why do we, I bring this up, why do we as humans think that way? Okay? And think about it as far as yourself. And it's almost a faith type thing, that something that I cannot see with the naked eye can have that big of an impact on something, for good or bad. Okay? Now, go back to that slide where we start thinking about how these bacteria is interacting with organic matter and plants. Even though these bacteria may be preyed upon and ate by protozoa or nematodes, and at the same sense, we can take this little bacteria, the wrong kind, and infect mammals or birds and wipe them out. Big thing about avian flu. Okay, you can take a bacteria or a virus and it jumps to this level, it can have huge detriment effects. Okay? Now, fungi. I'm going to try to do the same thing here where we talk about fungi. They get the negative fungus. You get these here. I'm not as good at pronouncing the bad guys as I am the good guys, because I've dealt with the good guys so much more than the bad guys. That's why I'm struggling here with the negative. The Philancora. Everybody probably knows what black tar spot on corn is. This is the fungus family that is creating this. How about the bottom one? I can pronounce this one. I've heard this one a lot my whole life. Fusarium root rot. Everybody's heard of Fusarium root rot in corn and in other plants. Okay, same thing. Fungus is a little bit bigger than bacteria. Some large groups of fungus we can actually see on either organic matter or on other substances, that we can have a fungus like Fusarium and wipe out a crop. Okay? The beneficial side, and I'm going to specifically pick out here Trichoderma, which is a subgroup of your mycorrhiza being the bigger family group. You get your Trichoderma fungi species, that the benefits that they can produce. They can kill other fungus. Some of these families can kill these families. Okay? Also, some bacteria. Some Trichoderma, some of the pathogen bacteria we've seen on the previous page, these beneficial fungi can take out and kill. Okay? Also, some of the Trichoderma, some of the families, is great for breaking up real dense cellulose. And the best way to describe that situation is like a corn root or a corn cob. Whenever you think about corn, the main corn root and a corn cob is the last stuff to want to decompose out in the field, right? Because it's so dense in the density of that carbon in there, it's very hard to break down. That these Trichoderma families is great for breaking this down. Also, some of the Trichoderma families is great for killing pathogens, either fungus or bacteria, on the surface of the seed. Okay? I know it will do that on the surface. We're actually in the middle of doing some testing with Infix, whether if it's actually helping to kill even fungus or bacteria inside that seed. Okay? And it's some really interesting things on how the Trichoderma fungi and what it's doing in relationship to seed health and how it can improve seed health that way. Okay? Any questions on this so far? All right? That's why I'm kind of trying to lay this out, the bad and the good this way, and kind of compare those, because so many times when we just talk about this side and someone's like, well, I don't know if that's really going to work or not. All right? We don't have any trouble. It doesn't take a lot of faith that Fusarium will take out a crop if we get it started in the soil. And how Fusarium here, fungus, can go from year to year, right? It can carry over for several years. If you get it infected in soil bad enough, it can keep going. It isn't just a one-year thing, okay? That's where the beneficial soil life, and I get that question asked a lot in relationship to the Infix. To me, it's like, do I need to keep applying this? If I apply Infix once, do I need to do it again? Okay? You are going to get a certain amount of carryover from year to year. A lot of that's going to depend on where you're at as far as winter temperatures and even summertime temperatures. You get down where I'm at and farther south, we tend to lose more of our bacteria, beneficial bacteria and beneficial fungus in the summertime than necessarily the wintertime. Sometimes the winter, especially so I don't like seeing not having snow. Okay? You having bare ground, no snow, and you start getting down below zero, I mean, you get substances, meat and things that you put into a deep freeze, you can get freezer burn on it. The same thing can happen to our soil life out here if we don't have a blanket on it. Okay? Either snow or a cover crop or something trying to protect it to keep it to carry over to the next year. All right? Now, the Infix product, we're trying to maintain, as I have here, we're trying to maintain a balance. There's beneficial bacteria and there's beneficial fungi in that product. We're trying to keep the same balance as far as the total counts, the plate counts, in the same ratio that we want to see naturally occur in a soil for a row cropping situation, row crop pasture. I shouldn't just say row crop, but in a agricultural process that way, because the ratios between bacteria and fungus is greatly different. If we go out here in this wooded area and we pull a soil sample and we check the ratio between bacteria and fungus as compared to we go over here to a cornfield, okay, or if you have a totally native grass area that's been in grass for extended period, I mean, more or less something that's virgin soil that's never been touched, that it's going to be a little different proportion too. So our goal with the Infix is trying to duplicate the natural balance between bacteria and fungus that we want in an agricultural process that way, okay? As far as the product itself, this coming year, there's not really any changes that's going on with the Infix. So I know we've had some changes. Matter of fact, I think that's my next slide, yes. I was sitting down putting this presentation together, and my first line up there, I was having to do some math, and as a lot of you know as good or better than me, that as you get older, birthdays come around quicker somehow. I'm losing days. It's supposed to be 365 days in a year, but it seems like my birthday keeps coming around quicker than when I was 15, 16 years old. It took forever to get to a birthday, but not anymore. So that's why I was sitting here, I was counting, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's been 25 years now since the Infix first came out. Now, it's not the same Infix that we have today, because I have here, I don't know, is anyone here that remembers with the soil supplement that we got the little dry pack with the soil supplement? Is anyone here that, okay? That's what I've got up here. Used to, with each 2.5 gallon jug of soil supplement, you got this little baggie of white substance. We kept afraid farmers would get in trouble for having cocaine or something like that. These little, and that was the bacteria part, okay? That part, the dry pack part with the soil supplement has actually been around since 1983, okay? The work that we have been doing with that little dry pack on our farm of doubling the packs in it, trying different things with how to implement the little dry pack. That's the reason why we kind of came up with the deal of, let's just take the nitrogen fixing bacteria that's in the original dry pack and increase the volume and the content of them, and that's how the infix started, okay? 2004, we added 2 species of trichoderma. In 2010, 2 more were added, and in 2012, what we got into was everybody wasn't using their dry pack because they were getting used to using the infix. And we was having farmers that wasn't getting the dry pack, which had a lot more diverse bacteria in it, okay? Like our rhizobium and some other things that was in there. Not rhizobium, some of the bacillus that was in there wasn't getting used. So we made the decision that, okay, every time someone's using the soil supplement, they're pretty much using the infix, okay? So we just decided to take the concentration of the bacteria that was in the dry pack and just include it in with the infix where we only had 1 bacterial product, okay? That's what was going on here in 2012. Now, some of you probably remember how used to the infix was not 100% water soluble. We had to run it through a stringer bag to catch the wheat bran and everything. 2019 is when we went totally soluble. In 23 is when we added the 5th family of trichoderma fungi, and then we also increased the rhizobium counts in the infix at that time too. Now, another job. You've heard me talk a lot in the past on how in the infix, obviously the bacteria that's in there is producing nitrogen for plants. Also, there's some of the families in there that's producing, or not producing, but it's making phosphorus available. We understood, we kind of partly grasped the nutrient thing. Last year I talked about plant hormones, okay, in a presentation. When we start talking about plant hormones, we have some families of bacteria here that actually produce a very small, limited amount of plant hormones. All right? They have that ability. Some of our bacillus families will produce auxins, plant hormone auxins. The panobacillus will produce cytokinins, and then other families of bacillus will produce some gibberellins. Our 3 main forms of plant hormones. We can get a very limited amount of those made from bacteria. They have that ability to produce some of those themselves, okay? Now, I'm going to review a little bit on some of these plant hormones. When we look at auxins, that an auxin is a plant hormone that's regulating plant growth. It's for stimulating cell elongation in the stems and in the root system of a plant. It also plays a role in cell division that way and how quick that happens. So, also in fruit development, primarily size. We start talking about tomatoes and peppers and things like that. We want a bigger tomato, a bigger pepper. The plant hormone auxins is the main thing that is producing that bigger size, okay? In forage crops, auxins is going to be the big thing, like for alfalfa or grasses, in trying to produce bigger stems, thicker leaves, okay? Make a plant more dense. It can produce more size, plant height, but the thing I've seen auxins do more in forages is to make that plant more dense, to where it weighs more. It may not be as tall, and I've seen situations in fields in comparisons like where we've been in comparison with the commercial program against the zone program. You go out there and measure it, and we may be the same height or a little bit shorter. But when you start weighing the plants that you harvest off an acre, ours will weigh more. And it's like, well, how can you have a plant that's a little shorter and it's going to weigh more? It's denser. If that stem's bigger and that leaf's thicker, we don't necessarily need more height for that plant to weigh more. Okay? I'm going to skip through those. Okay. Kelp grow primarily, kelp grow product has been our Ascophyllum kelps is extremely high in auxins. I've got their grow food and it's for sizing. Okay. Kelp grow for auxins, you can almost think of them as a way of, I'm not going to say totally replacing nitrogen, but it's going to have auxins is going to have a very similar effect as what we as farmers traditionally and normally think about nitrogen having an effect on a plant. When we think about applying nitrogen to a corn plant, it's going to make it a little darker greener, it's going to make it grow faster, it's going to make it bigger. Auxins and the kelp grow is going to have the same effect. Okay? It will not, if you pull a plant tissue and you check the nitrogen content of that corn plant, it's not going to replace the nitrogen needs of the plant. You know what I'm saying? It's not going to replace the nitrogen need, but as far as if you're wanting more growth and size, it can simulate that and produce that the same as nitrogen does. Does that make sense? All right? And I've had that happen. I've seen that happen a lot. Someone look at a plant. It's got a really good green color. It's really growing. They pull the nitrogen, pull a plant tissue, send it to a lab, and the lab says, well, you need a little more nitrogen. It may not necessarily be totally deficient, but it may be on the low of normal size, for normal level for the nitrogen. But the plant looks great. If you've got enough auxins, enough kelp grow in it, it can do that. Okay? Sometimes we as farmers kind of get hung up on color of our crop. You look at a crop and it's like, man, it's a little pale. What's our first thought? It's a little pale. I need to throw some nitrogen to it. Okay? That may or may not be the case of what you need. Okay? We can run plant hormones and we can throw a lot of plant hormones to it, but it still requires certain building blocks. The plant still needs certain things. That's why I said what I did about it's not going to replace nitrogen. It still needs the certain building blocks, but what plant hormones does is it helps a plant be more efficient at how it uses it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And too much nitrogen stresses the corn plant out. It can grow, but it doesn't actually give it quality in the end as much. It doesn't give it quality in the end. It's got the nutrients and the
yes. Because the main reason why is because the nitrogen, the extra nitrogen that you're talking about, tends to be what I put on. Either man-made, there's definitely man-applied. All man-made nitrogen has a certain amount of salt residual. All does. Okay? Some has more than others. Obviously, anhydrous ammonia and ammonium nitrate has the most amount of salt residual that's left in the soil or in a plant, to where urea, dry urea, of the man-made nitrogens has the least amount of salt residual. So, like you were saying, sometimes if we over-apply nitrogen, we can actually create a negative response in that plant, not necessarily because of the nitrogen, but the salt that comes with it. Okay? One thing very interesting about in chemistry, not in chemistry in general, in soils, in plants, and even in us. Going back to the salt discussion we were just talking about, salt and potassium look very similar, chemistry structure-wise. So much so that even our bodies have a hard time distinguishing which one's which. Okay? That's why the medical world wants to talk about, well, if you want to reduce your risk of heart disease or heart attack, you need to do what? Cut back on salt. Okay? That's partly true. That's a partial truth. In this sense, what happens is we as Americans, between our sugar and our salt, we overdo it. We get the ratio between the salt and the potassium out of balance. And the body has a hard time distinguishing the difference between the two. So what the body does, oh, we got all this, what it thinks is potassium, it grabs it, which is actually sodium, and uses it for the heart and that's what will cause a heart attack. Okay? Yes, you can say, okay, it's too much sodium, but we weren't having enough usable potassium in the body, because potassium is the thing that the body uses for muscles to be able to contract and let go. Okay? Well, the heart does that quite often. Okay? And if you get them reversed, the proportion between the two, it has a negative effect, obviously. The same thing can happen in the soil. Even microbes and whatever, to where if we're applying a lot of salt fertilizer, it can make things confusing for the soil life and for plants at what's going on. Whether if we're applying it with a man-made nitrogen, or what's the #1 used form of potassium used in the United States? Muriate of potash. Muriate of potash is 47% chlorine. Okay? It's extremely high, and I have to get my book, I'm trying to remember, pull it up, at the salt content of it. It's extremely high in salt also. So it's high in salt and high in potassium, and then you're applying that out there, then everything gets confused. Okay, what's what? That sometimes what we're applying, or the form that we're applying, can make what appears to be a potassium deficiency that way. And the plant may not be working it right, but the plant still metabolizes it right to where you get a forage then, you get a forage that's been applied a lot of muriate of potash, like Brian can tell you. The potassium levels on the forage test is through the roof, but it's out of balance. You get some places over in the Ozarks of Missouri, as I've heard some say over there, they're always 1 week away from a drought, because some places the topsoil is only about this thick, okay? This guy's been on the program, the soil balancing part of the zone program, for 15 years, 12 years. And this is one thing I'll challenge people with. Whenever you're doing things more naturally, things change slow. So slow that sometimes we as the farmer, where we're there every day, we don't notice the change. Okay? A good example is, if you got some little person that's a relative, you know how it is, and probably where all of us was that way, your relative, you show up and say, oh man, you're growing like a weed. Last time I see you grow to what they didn't see you. Your parents are sitting there like, well, I guess he did, because why? They seen you every day, okay? Soils change the same way, slow. And why I say that, this guy called the office, this was about the second week of December. He was in an area where there was really dry this fall. He thought he had enough hay to get through, but he had a neighbor that had a field that wasn't too far away that the neighbor wasn't needing, so the neighbor offered it to him, said, if you want to come in and cut it and bale it, you can have the hay off from it. Well, the neighbor's been fertilizing it commercially for years. He said, oh, he said, it was just a beautiful field of hay. He said, it looked a lot better than all of my fields. He went in there and cut it. The reason why he called me was his beef cows wouldn't eat the neighbor's hay. His hay that he thought didn't look as good and had a few weeds in it, he rolled it out there and he said they would just lick it all up like a vacuum cleaner and suck it off. He'll roll the neighbors out. He said they'll pick through it and leave over half of the hay. And he's calling me. He was calling me. He's like, what have I got to do to get the cows to eat my neighbor's hay? But then he said, he's like, well, he said, not to be mean, but he said, I didn't really know if this fertilizer program was working or not. Because he was comparing to the neighbor's field. Now the neighbor's field looked compared to his field, but he's like, I'm convinced now. He said, my cows told me the difference. Okay? And that isn't the first time I've had people call in and make those comments to me. And they're like, the cow, and usually it goes back to an animal. It's either a horse, a cow, or a goat, or sheep that convinces the farmer that, hey, what you've been doing is better. Okay? So I say that in relation to what we're talking about with these nutrients, that sometimes it can get discouraging. You're trying to do what's the right thing. This applies to a lot of different aspects of life. We're doing the right thing, and it's like, is this really worth the time and effort of doing this way? that sometimes it takes a little thing that's not supposed to be not near as intelligent as us that has to wake us up and tell us that yes, you are on the right track that way, okay? So, anything else on kelp growth? We chased that rabbit. Okay, now, I'm not going to spend much time on gibberellins. Gibberellins is one of the other plant hormones there. That way, gibberellins isn't talked about or really a whole lot in this part of the world. Cytokinins. Now, cytokinins is the plant hormone kinin that's really important for cell division, shoot growth, shoot initiation, also the arrangement, how leaves are arranged, especially on dicots. Where dicots, you have branching, okay? Where those branches and where those leaves end up out on a plant is determined by the plant hormone cytokinin within that plant, okay? If we're short of cytokinins, branching and leafing is going to be limited, okay? Produce is really a better and more extreme, I should say, example. You take like a tomato plant or a bell pepper plant. If we get too much auxins, hear what I said? You can get too much auxins. If we get too much auxins or too much nitrogen, we can end up with a tomato plant or a pepper. I mean, I've seen pepper plants this tall, bell pepper plants, okay? Out in California, I've seen them this tall, and the branching, it's that far between each branch. That's way, way too far apart, okay? They pushed too much nitrogen. They weren't using excess auxins. They were using too much nitrogen, so much so that it diluted the cytokinin levels in that plant, and the plant didn't know where to put branches and leaves out at. Okay? That's where you got the hormones is helping to balance that plant and telling it what it needs to do. Okay? Leaf aging. Also, it has there on this here, this vascular bundles. Okay? Every plant in the stem has bundles similar to like we think of like our veins inside our body that comes up this stem. Okay? The size of those veins, how big the bundles is in that stem, is determined by cytokinins. Now, if we want nutrients and water to be able to get from the soil up into that plant, we need those veins, those vascular bundles, well developed. And we need cytokinins for that, okay? Seed germination, okay? Cytokinin plays a big part. I didn't talk about it a while ago, but that is one of the key things that gibberellins does. A very small amount of gibberellin hormone in every seed is actually what starts the germination process when you get the right condition. Let me rephrase that. When it's dark, moisture, temperature, and things is right, that gibberellins is what the thing says, okay, we're going to go. Okay? That is built into that seed from the parent plants. Okay? Corn industry, seed corn industry, your seed corn dealer may not be telling you this, but they're going through a lot of trauma right now. The seed corn industry is. They're having trouble keeping enough viable seed to sell to you as a farmer. Okay? As far as having good cold germ, even having good seedling vigor, they're having troubles. They're all struggling with it. Those that's a little more naturally minded is backing up and trying to figure out, they're realizing, well, maybe there's something more than NPK that's determining good quality seed. And some of them are going back and looking at plant hormones now, okay, and trace minerals, which I'm very proud of those that's doing those type of things, but these plays a big key in that, okay? Now, I mentioned last year a name change, and probably none of you have seen this label this year, did you? Okay? You will this year. You will this year. This is the only label that's going to be, this is the replacement for the foliar supplement. And everything, the product is the same. You're going to look at it, it's going to smell the same. It's going to taste the same if you're one of those that drinks it too. That it's the same. We just changed the name trying to minimize confusion with farmers. because where it had foliar supplement on there, I had people that was getting confused and not necessarily using it in their corn starter because they thought it was only supposed to be used in a foliar spray. And that was kind of the reason why I made the decision, we got to change this name. And it's been ongoing for many, many years on the confusion part. One thing I was going to bring up a while ago on the kelp grow label, one other addition that you're going to see on these is I've been working for 16 months trying to get these products listed with California, CDFA. You talk about a bureaucratic mess. I mean, California is just a mess. But I've been working 16 months trying to get 6 products listed with them. Okay, and so the Aqua 10, the kelp grow. Just before I left, I found out that the last 2 had been approved. I mean, literally just Friday. I just found out that the soil supplement and the Infix was the last 2 that we hadn't got listed with them. So now the Aqua 10 is high in cytokinins, okay, which is going to help in these parts over here. Now, I showed this picture last year. In the next slide, we're going to be talking about this spot right here, okay? This is going to be a cross section of that growing point on that dicot. The CK here is for cytokinins. That's why I had that on that previous slide, that abbreviation. If you look at cytokinins, here's some auxins, and here's cytokinins over here. My best description of how to describe cytokinins inside a plant is a traffic director. It is determining cytokinins, a big role within the stem and branch of that leaf is the director as far as what nutrients need to go where, what other plant hormones, auxins, needs to go where, what's going to happen. Cytokinins is the ones that's directing the traffic that way, okay? So, it also blocks movement. If you look here, suppression is the red line with kind of the T at the end of it. It's blocking what happens between all of these different interactions, okay? That's the importance of how cytokinins is going to work, all right? That's why it's so important for root development initially from when that seed first germinates. I got one seed corn company that's strongly looking at using the Aqua 10 as a seed treatment now, because they've already been doing testing for over a year of using the Aqua 10. They first started with bad germ lots. They was trying to improve a lot of bad corn seed that did not have a good cold germ, and they were trying to find something to put on it to get it to where it's going to be sellable, okay? Because they're getting such a high percentage of corn seed that's falling into that category. Well, they originally started, they had several, I think they had like 24 different products that they were using. They've got it narrowed down now to 3, and where they're going through and doing testing and looking at the number of plants, and the Aqua 10 with the Infix combined is the lead in the pack right now. So it's interesting how these plant hormones with bacteria is playing an effect even on seed corn. So now, how does CK, your cytokines, how does it affect production? Whenever we look at this, cytokinin levels, elevated cytokine levels is very important for carbohydrate metabolism. How's the plant going to metabolize sugars? How's the plant going to combine those sugars, okay, into complex carbohydrates? When you're in a dairy situation, you're looking at the different type of feed sources and the quality of feeds. Cytokines is going to play a very big factor in the quality numbers of your forages and even corn silage and different aspects that way. So, also, cytokines prevents proteins from breaking down and from chlorophyll destruction. chlorophyll can be destroyed. If that plant's metabolism gets way off, more or less what the plant's doing, it's going into a cannibalistic stage as far as where it's self-consuming itself. Cytokines is the big thing to keep that plant functioning like it's supposed to and to keep it from using its own energy up that way. Okay? Also prevent leaf yellowing and stabilizing the content of the protein and the immune system of the plant. Cytokines plays a big role in the immune system, how this plant is going to interact with diseases, fungus or bacteria. Okay? It's interesting that a lot of the seed corn companies, most of them is coming to the conclusion that a lot of the seed quality issues is coming from infected bacteria that's in the actual seed. Okay? And some of you have been coming to our meetings for a long time. We kind of talked about that a long time ago in a relationship of genetic engineering, that the genetic engineering process on seeds, they use a virus to get the new DNA splice to fit in that seed and in that plant for their genetic modification. Well, we said we're going to come to a point that we're going to have an issue with pathogens because they're implementing those into these seed and into the structure of these plants. Okay? And sad to say, it's coming around that way. They're determined, well, we got these fungus and these bacteria that's in this corn seed, and that's what's killing the germ. And it's been getting worse over the last 20 years. And it's like, well, yeah. Okay? So, that's one of the reasons why I put up there what I did about the infix, as far as the good guys and the bad guys in relationship to bacteria and fungus. Okay? That the good bacteria and good fungus can fight off those negative aspects. That's one of the reasons why we've talked about going into kind of the GMO age is we want to make sure we're using plenty of infix or the soil supplement to break down those genetic modified crop residues as quickly as possible. It's one of the reasons why I put the point up there about some of your trichoderma being so good in breaking down dense cellulose, that dense structure, that genetic modified stalks are very hard and hard to digest. Okay? You don't have to ask me, you ask cows that. I mean, they can tell you that too. Okay? So, that's a point that cytokines plays in this. Any comments or questions on this? Okay. Now, can these little guys, talking about your good bacteria, there's 3 listed here. We get our rhizobium, we've already been talking about. Rhizobium is very important for nodulating legume plants. Okay? Your rhizobium bacteria is the ones that will infect that root system and create those nodules. Your bacillus families are very important for solubilizing phosphorus. They do not make phosphorus. Okay? They're solubilizing inorganic forms of phosphorus that's already in your soil. All right? That's what their purpose is. They can take a phosphorus rock, like a hard rock phosphate, and those bacillus families can get on that and start breaking that down, and more or less breaking it from a big rock to a really small rock, and they keep breaking these substances down to where a plant can utilize them, or even the next form. That's why I had those different levels, to where the next level might be able to use that, a bacteria or whatever, in doing that, another family. Your azotobacter, now rhizobium affixes nitrogen, but they can only affix nitrogen when they are in association, a symbiotic relationship with a plant. Okay? The azotobacters are what's called free-living nitrogen bacteria. They do not have to live with a soybean plant or an alfalfa plant or a clover plant in order for them to be able to take nitrogen from the air and affix it in the soil. Does that make sense? They're free. They can function wherever. They're not just associated just with plant roots that way, okay? Your Canibacillus are also important for cytokine production too. Now, the infix, all of these families is in the infix, all right? Now, the Rhizobium, Bacillus, Azotobacter, and Panabacillus, those are big families, okay? I'm going to use my name. Keith Montgomery, okay? We use in Western European names, you get your surname, okay? We tend to put last, okay? Knudsen, Montgomery, okay? Montgomery's, you go to Dexter, Missouri, that's a really big clan, okay? You go down there, there's a lot of Montgomerys down there. And so when you say Montgomery in town, there is like, well, which one? Okay? Same thing as saying Rhizobium. Rhizobium be equivalent to my name Montgomery. Okay? Subcategories of Rhizobium, now bacteria and fungus, they do opposite. It's more or less last name first. Okay? The surname. That Rhizobium is a very broad term. Like Rhizobium, there is 12 different subfamilies, or you could say households, with that same last name. Okay? So, the infix has all 4 of these, plus 3 more families that I didn't list on here, as far as broad families. Now, when you start taking in all of the individual households, there's over 16 different in the infix of just the bacteria, okay? So we're trying to, in the infix, trying to get a broad spectrum. Now, I will say there is a few Bacillus families. Let me back up. All of these families here are predominantly aerobic. Okay, you've heard me talk about aerobic bacteria as far as they breathe in oxygen like us and they put out carbon dioxide. Your pathogen bacteria, like I talked about earlier about food poisoning, or you get some of the other pathogens, they're the opposite. They're more like a plant. They're taking in carbon dioxide. Those are considered anaerobic, okay? There is 2 species of Bacillus that's in the infix that, lack of better terms, straddles the fence. They are an aerobic bacteria, but they can function in an anaerobic condition. Okay? They can work on a very limited oxygen level. The reason why we put them in there is the adversities of farming. Okay? That if you do your soil spray or you plant your corn and you use the infix and you put it out there and the weatherman says you're not supposed to have a rain for 3 or 4 days, and you go out there and you spray it, and you get, which can happen in our area very easily, get a 3-inch rain overnight. My ground will go waterlogged, especially if there's water standing on the lower ends of the field. It's going to get waterlogged. What's going to happen to my majority of my aerobic bacteria? A bunch of them is going to suffocate. So once that soil starts trying to come back aerobic, the water leaves. Who's going to be in control? If I don't have somebody there, the pathogens will take over. They'll come in. They'll take over. If you've got a few there, they're going to start multiplying in that conditions, in that anaerobic condition, and take off. So that's the reason why we have a couple of those families of Bacillus. They can function in that condition. That way, when the conditions start swinging around, you've got a little bit of somebody there that's fighting for you for in the disease aspect. That's the reason why we want to have this broad spectrum of bacteria this way, okay? Now, everybody see this picture pretty good? This is a trial some farmers did. This isn't mine. If you look here, on this side, the roots of this corn plant comes down about right here. This one's down about right here, okay? This is some farmers. This is an organic field over around Buffalo, Missouri, okay? Now, if you look at some of these dates, they had a really wet spring, okay? In the summer, wet, okay? This corn got planted the middle of June. I mean, typically over there, they're planting corn the 1st of May, but it was wet. They got in, got planted to mid-June. I was there when this picture is taken. We didn't have scheduled a field day over there for this group for the 1st day of July. Well, you can see the corn back there. We didn't have much of a corn demonstration for the field day with all the corn like this. And matter of fact, this cornfield was actually one of the bigger cornfields that I've seen over there. But this particular grower, he had a 12-row planter with no liquid. He'd been doing the soil balancing program like we recommend for about 10 years. And he just never put any liquid on there for a starter. This year, some of his sons was wanting to, that we need to do something for a starter. The John Deere planter, they've always been using talc for seed lubricant in the boxes, okay? What they decided to do was 6 rows, they just used talc. The other 6 rows, they used the dry talc, and they mixed the infix in with the talc in proportion to what we try to look for, that pound per 10 acres, okay? And put it on the seed in the box while they were planting. Now, one of the sons has been kind of following some of the studies and some of the work that's being done on corn emergence, where you go out and you put a flag when you have the first seed emerge, and he was going out every 12 hours and flagging, okay? The blue flags is the first emergence within the first 12 hours. This is the infix side. This is the talc with no infix. Okay? It's the only difference, just the infix. Now, is that an ideal situation? No. Like I've already said, I would like to see the Aqua 10 with it. And, I mean, Brian lays out a corn starter, he's putting the M5. Now, all they did was the infix. Okay? And you see the root difference. And so, all the way across this field, and it wasn't, when I got there that day, it was one of those things that you could stand at the end of the field and look at the rows. You could make out that there was something different, but it was one of them things that you couldn't just really, you ever seen, you couldn't really put your finger on. It's like, there's a difference here, but I can't really make out what it is. Well, that was before we dug up the corn. And everybody else, there's about a dozen of us there, and it was like, there's something different. So one of the boys said, well, I'm going to go dig up some corn plants. Well, that's what he come back with. That was part of the difference that we were seeing, because obviously the root system down here, okay? Now, what was the difference at the end of the year? They didn't wait. I wished I would have known when they were going to be doing the corn, I would have tried to have been over there. They were just going by a yield monitor on their combine. The infix side ranged from anywhere from 5 to 20 bushel per acre increase as compared to the side that just had the talc. And that was just with the dry infix. They had about a 4-pound test weight advantage, more or less. The corn, because it's interesting, they were so wet, and then they got to the end of the corn year, they were extremely dry. They went weeks without rain, okay? That it turned off dry. All the other organic growers around there had test weights on their corn ranging from 50 to 52 pounds. The infix side was running 56 to 57. The non-infix side was running like 52, like everybody else's was. Now, it withstood the drought better too, where the infix was. So much so that when they got to the point of shelling corn, the infix was running about 19-20% moisture. The non-infix side was running 15 to 16% moisture. okay? They were all the same conclusion. Where they were there, they was like, we could tell when the real dry heat was on, the non-infix side was wilting down. The infix side did not wilt down that same way. So evidently the corn plants, obviously because possibly of root systems, was rooted better and was getting moisture and nutrients that the other side wasn't, and it made a difference that way. Okay? Now, is it ideal just putting the dry infix in there? No. I mean, does it work? Obviously, yes. So, I put this up here that if there's somebody here that doesn't have liquid on your planter, I mean, you could still do the infix. That's why there is a handout over here that, and I don't have this, and I don't know, I can't tell you where to go get it. There's a handout over here on this dust, okay? It's a soybean-based lubricant, all right? Talc, if you read the label on some of this talc, I mean, it's not the greatest substance. Some people is kind of allergic to it and cause breathing, respiratory issues, and there's other things, and it's like, if the infix was still able to work this good with something like the talc that's not going to be in the best working condition, if you had something like this that is a soy-based, now they tell me that it's non-GMO, but they don't have that on the label, okay? But I'm assuming that it is because that's like there were some people down in this organic group that used it. So if you get this, check with your certifier if you're organic, if you want to try to do something like this, and make sure that it is allowed before you go and start using it, okay?
Could you use the same technique drilling in grass seed into a pasture or oats or such?
If you're going to use something like this, you need a carrier.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it, the dry infix.
Yes.
Yeah, mix it right in.
That is kind of one of the hurdles on using the infix and something like on seeding grass or even like someone that doesn't have liquid. Using a pound per 10 acres is such a small amount, and we're going to try to split this up like them 12 row planter, and you're going to try to split this up. And it's like, oh my goodness, how do you do that? You need something for a dilution factor or a carrier that if you do not have liquid set up on your planter, look at something like this, okay? Now, I've already stressed twice, I would like to really beg and plead that you go ahead and put liquid on your planter, that to where you can get some of the benefits of some of the other products. But if it's just not feasible or something at that point, this is something to do, all right? Yes?
Or you mix it with a little bit of water and spray on your seed as it went in there, so there's a very minute amount on there, just to get it spread out?
You can.
I don't know if you guys said that years ago.
And that's a good question, because in Canada, about all the infix that goes to our Canadian distributor is used as for seed treatment on cereal grains. I would say over half of them are actually treating the seed, where they're liquefying the infix, they're taking a little bit of aqua 10, and they've got like a cone bottom tank, because they're doing all their cereal grains in bulk. They got the big ear seeders and everything. So when they're taking it out of their hopper bottom seed tank and going to their tender, going through a conveyor, they're spraying the infix on that seed as it's going through. And they said they've done some checking. They said the time it goes through that and then it's conveyed off that tender onto the seeder and everything, they're pretty much content that they're getting a good even distribution that way. Now, my rule is, from when the infix is liquefied, if you're going to do a seed treatment like he's talking about, you're going to spray it on the seed. I want that infix dried as quickly as possible, preferably not over 3 hours, okay? The infix, and that's the reason why we do the dry form, okay? The shelf life on that in a dry form is, I'm not real sure. I've got some down there in my cold room that I keep it 60 degrees or less year round, no sunlight, no nothing. I've got some infix down there over 15 years old, and it will still meet the plate counts on the label. Okay? They're a little less than from production time. I mean, hey, 15 years. But now when we liquefy them, they're coming out of hibernation. Okay? When they're in that dry form, they're in hibernation. So a lot of extremes doesn't affect them as much. Now once they're liquid, remember they're aerobic bacteria. We put them in an aqueous solution. That's more or less an anaerobic solution or environment. It's going to take those bacteria about 5 to 6 hours to come out of hibernation and dormancy and start trying to multiply and function. So that's why I said, if we're going to liquefy it and spray it on something, if we've got it liquefied, they've not come out of dormancy and it dries back, then they're stable, okay? So, did everybody kind of catch that? That if you're going to do that way, either if you're going to put them on seed, now I've got some produce people, get a table and spread like tomato seed or whatever out and mix a little bit of aqua tin and infix together and spray it on the tomato seed, let it dry. If you can let it dry there quickly, and then you can put it back into the bag. You can do that this time of year and put it back in the bag and going to plant it here whenever, okay? So that is possible. I just want it dried out as quickly as possible to where they don't come alive or out of hibernation.
Or if you do it right before planting, like you mixed it and you plant your own plant it, you find too, right?
That's like up there in Canada. I mean, they're doing that. It's going on the tender, and within an hour, it's in the ground.
Yeah.
So it don't really matter though. Now, I will say this: if you treat some seed, okay, try to keep, which you need to do this anyway. If you get someone that really cares about you, that's selling you seed, will tell you to keep that seed out of direct sunlight, even if it's in a box or in a bag. It does not, the sunlight radiation. That if the bacteria is just as critical or more critical to get sunlight or sunburn as what seed is, okay? That's one reason why we got the brown box that we got the infix in with the flip lid. I try to make it as easy as possible to where you guys will close it back up. If you're not going to use everything, if that's 5 pounds, you say, well, I only need a pound, okay? Get your pound out, get it sealed back up, put a nice twist strap on there for you, and get that lid closed, okay? Keep the moisture out and keep them out of sunlight as quickly as possible. And even if you're out in the field or you got something, a mixing station where you're doing stuff, and you're not using all your infix, keep it underneath something in the shade, okay? Even if it's spring and it's only 50 degrees, keep it out of that sunlight, okay? Radiation can get stuff quick, okay? Anybody else? Okay, now, this is the corn program that's in the row crop guide. That's the yellow cover one, the row crop one. This is the organic one. Now, if you look at the seed starter here, this column here, okay, I've got 12 ounces of aqua tin, 16 ounces of kelp grow. Now, a little point, if you look at the conventional program, it's got 16 ounces. If you look at, the organic program has 16 ounces here. If you look at the conventional, I think it's still got 16 ounces too, but there's a footnote that says, add for corn silage or extra plant growth. I don't necessarily have that option for the organic. Does anyone figure out why? Why I kind of want the kelp grow to be standard starter? We was talking about it earlier. It's quiz time. See if everybody's listening. Auxins can be the replacement for what? Nitrogen. So if I'm wanting to stimulate this plant, what's one of the biggest shortage nutrient for organic corn? Nitrogen. Okay? That's the reason why I want to kind of keep kelp grow in there in the organic. It's not to say conventional that you can't do it. That's why I kind of put there as an option that if you want corn silage or something that you're wanting more plant growth, thicker leaves and everything, when you're taking it to silage, kelp grow will work good in this starter here, okay? We got our infix, if you're needing TR3 or VR5 for traces, fish, okay? Now, out of this whole list, you said, okay, you can only have one thing. I would have a hard time making a decision. Infix, Aqua 10. It'd be a really hard choice for me. I wouldn't make the choice. I'd be figuring out how I would get the Aqua 10 and the Infix both, okay? I do that. We was talking about this grass seed. Whenever I'm planning my drill in the past, I say in the past, my mechanic son finally got liquid put on my drill this fall. Oh, so ecstatic, okay? That every seed that went in that drill box, we was mixing up Aqua 10 and Infix and putting it in a hand sprayer. The hard way to do it is we're dumping bags of seed in there, we're spraying it, wetting it down, stirring it, spray it a second time, and went through doing it that way, okay? I think my kids are more excited about the on-seed starter than I am, because it didn't take very long to mix it up, dump it in the tank, and we was gone. But if I only have choice, even if I was set up for liquid, and I'm on a budget, and you say, okay, I can only spend so much money, I would do the Aqua 10 and the Infix for a starter, for anything. Grass, corn, whatever, okay? Now, here's the soybeans. We show them pictures of corn. Here's the starter for soybeans. Aqua 10, kelp grow. Notice I got optional over here, okay? And VR5 TR3 or VR5 or 10% manganese and MS crystals. I haven't talked much about the MS crystals. The purpose for it in the starter is for food source for the infix. Those of you think familiar with that, we got that carbohydrate source, that MS crystals, in trying to give a good food source for the bacteria to when they come out of dormancy. When they come out of dormancy, they're ready to go, okay? And I want food there for them, okay? It's like a hungry teenage boy. They're ready to go. They're needing food, okay? So that's what, when we look at the soybeans, okay? Now, I'm going to back up a slide. We've made some changes in the row crop thing, more so on the organic side. And the big thing that was added is, you know, if you go through and thumb through some of these on the organic, down here at the bottom, okay? I've got here, for to help control army worms, consider adding a beneficial nematode, okay? Most time farmers, when they hear the term nematode, they start, whoa, they think about cyst nematode, you're going to destroy my bean crop, you're going to, okay? There is beneficial nematode, just like there's been good bacteria, bad bacteria, okay? There's good nematodes and there's bad nematodes, okay? Some of these beneficial nematodes, like this particular species here, will go after the larvae and eggs of armyworms. This different one here will go after cutworms, okay? Organic, sometimes these things can be a challenge, okay? Wireworm, cutworms, armyworms, okay? That I've been doing some work and playing with it on my place the last couple of years, and I'm seeing some things, and I've got some produce people, especially cucumber beetles. I've probably seen more people use more that way. Cucumber beetles, there's one of these beneficial nematodes that will go after the eggs and larva stage of cucumber beetles while they're in the soil, okay? These nematodes is applied in the soil. A lot of our bad insect and worms, the eggs and everything is laid in the soil. These beneficial nematodes, that's food for them. Some of these actually go and look for things. And some of these beneficial nematodes will actually kill the bad nematodes, like cyst nematode, okay? So that's one thing, and there is some handouts. This Arbico company from Arizona, they're really big. This is who I've been getting my beneficial nematodes from. Actually, I'm kind of in discussion with them they're primarily working with produce people on small scale. So their little packet thing that they've got will cover like 10 acres, and that's as big as they've got. I'm kind of negotiating with them and talking about, hey, can we do something and trying to get a package that would be like for a 50-acre package or something like that, thinking about people and doing things like this. So I wanted to bring that up as you go through and look at these different program guides. That's going to be one of the differences, that's going to be one of the few differences that there is on the row crop and even on the specialty crop, okay? So, any comments or questions about any one of these programs? Okay. I got, how do we maintain balance? Do you have a question, Jonas?
On the, going back to the NFIX thing that we talked about, would you be comfortable with, like, say in a corn starter situation, to mix the MS crystals and the NFIX, keep it dry, and then add that to your liquid in the field?
In the seed box?
No, on the starter,
Okay,
in the tank.
okay.
The liquid tank, if you were to just, make things easier, would you be comfortable with mixing the NFIX and the MS crystals and having your tank of liquid over here, and then as it's going into the planter, you're mixing the
Oh, we mix the two things dry together, you're saying?
Yes,
And
yeah,
then
dry.
just add water?
You can't, because the bacteria is going to be in a dormancy stage, they're not going to know the difference in being with that sugar or matter of fact, a portion of that dry material that the bacteria is actually impregnated on the infix is sugar. So the infix, there's part of the carrier, because technically, if you took that 5-pound box and we just had the bacteria, I mean, you could hold them all in a teaspoon, okay, less. So technically, we're already having to put carrier or filler with it to get it to the point that we got that 5 pounds. So pre-mixing MS crystals with that, in dry form would be no issue. Liquid form, myself personally, when I'm liquefying my infix, I'm putting my dry stuff all together. We're measuring out our MS crystals. Let's say for our sprayer tank mix, we're needing 25 pound to do a 25 pound soil spray or whatever. I'm putting 25 pound MS crystals in a 5 pound pail, and then I'm taking my infix and dumping it on top of the MS crystals, and then one of my little boys he loves playing with the cordless drill with that squirt, and he's like, hey, play all you want, as long as you don't slosh it out, you can have, and so they liquefy it, okay? Now, when we remember the time thing we was talking about on the seed treatment, you can liquefy that ahead of time, okay? For the sake of if you're planting corn and you're like, man, it's taking the time to do this, you can liquefy this ahead of time as long as if that infix is in the soil within 4 to 5 hours of when you liquefy it in that bucket or in an induction tank or whatever, okay? Or even in the finished, if you're making a complete tank mix in a tote tank or whatever, that if you get everything in there together, I would like to try to see that in the soil within 5 hours, okay? But dry, that would be no issue. Anybody else? Now, when I'm talking about balance here, I'm not talking about soil balance. We've covered some stuff here on bacteria and fungus and hormones and some on nutrients. When we start talking about stewardship / profitability, okay? If you as a farmer, if you're not profitable at the end of the year, it really don't matter what fertilizer program you use, okay? In a sense that if you're not going to be farming anymore, all right? And thinking about that as far as in balance, we start talking about soil life. We start talking about adding something like infix. What's going on with that infix and how is it reacting with plants and other organic matter. And we start talking about, I'm going to throw in here some stuff that I haven't talked about. We start talking about tillage or no tillage, okay? What your tillage is, or if you're in a total no-till situation, or if you're moldboard plowing, or you're trying to do something in between, okay? Then we start talking, oh, you're going to throw in the category now, we're going to throw in hormones. What we're going to do with plant hormones and how do they interact with everything? And then we get amendments. Do we use muriate of potash? Do we use potassium sulfate? We was talking about copper earlier. Do I need to add some copper? Okay. What amendment? Or nitrogen. We're talking about, well, we got to have nitrogen. Okay. Air. Okay. I haven't talked about that a lot. Do you realize that 25% volume-wise of your soil should be air? What are you doing in managing your air on your farm? Okay? Nutrient balance. Now you're kind of talking about where's the balance of the base saturations? Where's your calcium? Where's your magnesium? Okay? Now, when we get to be a farmer and you start throwing all of these things together and it's like, and it's very easy to do. I or somebody else can give a presentation on soil life, and you come out there, man, I got to work on that. And if you're at a conference, you go to the next deal, and the guy's talking about tillage, and it's like, man, I got to do something on that. And then you go to another one, and someone's talking about soil balancing or nutrients, I need to do that. Then you get to the end of the day, and you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Okay, see what I'm saying? That's why I'm talking about this balance thing, that I don't want you to get home, okay, I'm talking about soil life, and that's what you've got to do this year. We have a balance thing. And every one of these, in some way or form, I was trying to figure out when I did this slide, I was wanting to try to get arrows to the different blocks, but I realized I was going to have so many arrows on here that I wasn't going to be able to keep it clear. Because as many blocks as we have here is as many different combinations as we can have. And multiple, okay? I mean, we could have 100 different combinations here. Now, you as a farmer, you have a decision to make. We have multiple decisions, not just one. Like tillage and air. What do we do? It's complete no-till. Well, if my ground is getting hard to where I can't get any air in there to where it's making the soil life not function right, then I'm going to have to add more amendments. See what I'm talking about? And we can start on any one of these and we can go other directions, and they're too interrelated to separate them all up. And that's what makes it so hard. I mean, I grew up in this, okay? I've seen a lot of changes happen even in general agriculture. When my dad first started with talking about bacteria like that dry pack in 1983, you heard me use the term earlier, snake oil. And the snake oil salesman, or the man, he's doing, Montgomery down there is doing some weird stuff on his farm. Okay? He's planting cover crops. Dad started planting cover crops in 1980. It wasn't popular mainstream like it is now. Okay? But, and that's another block that I didn't even put in here. I thought about it after the fact and I ran out of spaces. Cover crops. I mean, yeah, that fits into tillage, but that also affects the air. That affects, see what I'm saying? We need to think about this when we're looking and thinking about nutrients, bacteria. They're all interrelated, okay? Like here after lunch, I want to talk a little more about nutrients and nutrient interaction in relationship back to soil life. Okay? That we need nutrients. Like we were talking about nitrogen earlier. We have to have a certain amount of nitrogen to make a corn crop. Okay? That's just a necessity. Corn's a nitrogen needer. It's not a nitrogen producer. That we need that. Now, what forms, what amounts, is decisions that you as a grower has got to make in relationship to keeping the center block functionable. Profit and stewardship of that, of the land. Okay? That, and this is something that I feel like has really been lost in American agriculture. I've not been to talked a lot of agriculture production in other parts of the world as much. We're very short-sighted in relationship to following generations. Okay? we tend to make agricultural decisions for just this year, maybe 5 years down the road, okay? But what about, I see a few younger people in here, what about for them? Are we making decisions in relationship and trying to keep these things in balance to where they have as good or better soil to work with that I can leave to them as what I started with? Okay? That's also a really big, that falls in the stewardship thing, I think, in how that happens. Okay? And we need to think about that. There's fewer families on the farms in America. Okay? And it's sad to say, but the farm families has been the big reason of why the next generations aren't still on the farm. I've heard many times where parents is like, you need to go to town and get you a job. Even if the son was wanting to stay on the farm and work, you need to go to town and get you a job. You can get insurance there. So, I mean, the first occupation given to man was to be stewardship of the garden. Okay? It's extremely important. That job is still applies to every man, mankind, even today. Even if people recognize it or not, it still does tie back to that. Okay? Now, I'm not a tree hugger in the sense that a lot of people think of tree huggers that, oh, we need to let everything go back to the way it was and just let it go. No, that's not. He had a garden planted. God actually planted the garden, and he told man to take care of it. So, and he also told man to till the ground too. And I'm not just totally saying that no-till is totally wrong, but he also told us to till the ground. Now, he didn't necessarily say we're supposed to go out there with the mowboard plow and roll it over 2 times a year. He did. But in some soils, that may need to happen. Okay? So, that's part of this thing I'm talking about with this balance. All right? Any comments or questions? Probably won't be my only soapbox today, but... Okay? Yes?
I did see something this morning saying that kind of rolls into that. It said, success is not what you have at the end of the year, it's what you leave for the next generation.
I like that. Now, one thing that we should not be leaving the next generation is a big bank bill. Okay? Now, oh my goodness, I ain't going to be able to come up with the chapter and verse. The book of Proverbs says, blessed is the man that is able to leave an inheritance to his grandchildren. Not just, well, what am I going to do for my kids? What am I going to... Extremely blessed is the man that can leave something for 2 generations down the road. Like I said, in American agriculture, we're so short-sighted, we don't get the first one, okay? But the second one, all right? And that's tough, and that's part of this balance thing, okay? Now, in that sense, when we have decisions to make, agriculture, you have a lot of decisions to make. Don't separate out the job occupation of tending the garden with business, okay? We shouldn't do that. We tend to do that way too much also in our Western society, that we want to separate. I mean, a lot of people will get up in arms about separation of church and state and prayer in schools and all that different type of stuff. But some of that's come about because the majority of those people have done that with God in their business. I mean, hey, okay, yeah, that's church time, but now I'm farming. We're going to farm. Okay? So, all right. Anybody else? I got through this quicker than I thought I was going to. I still got 10 minutes. So we still a little bit, Brian, on lunchtime?
I guess if the food comes, it's not here.
If the feed wagon ain't showed up. Okay.
I do have a question on air. This
Yes.
is something I have struggled with. I mean, you've been to, I think, for Farming Missouri. That's on there. I don't know if you have not, or by any halls.
Mhm.
and all pastureland, and I struggle with getting, I feel like enough air into the soil. Like, with pastureland, how do you get more like, I don't know, life into the soil? Like, I tried all the concoctions and rotation, and then.
Should be actually a threefold thing, okay? This is my perspective. That we can get plant tillage, we can get chemistry tillage, and then we can get actual physical tillage, okay? And it's hard to say, kind of like we talk about it's hard to say, okay, we're just going to do this one, okay? That's not, we shouldn't approach it that way. We talk about cover crops, trying to do things or make sure I plant things out there that's going to have a taproot, that's going to try to open up the soil, okay? Chemistry-wise, we'll talk about some here after lunch, that balance between like magnesium and calcium. How much airspace do I give in there? And then also just physical tillage, okay? So my my pasture and hay fields, I've got a tillage, I say tillage bar, it is for a pasture situation, a straight toolbar, and I have anhydrous knives on it every 18-inch spacing, okay? I'm only going about 5 inches deep. And I'm using the brand of anhydrous knives. It's called a mold knife. It's a patented knife where it has a hard surface plate on the bottom of the knife. And then it's hard surfaced up the front to where when you run that thing about 5 inches deep, it'll leave like a little mold trail down at the bottom of that sweep. I set mine up reasonable, and I got liquid tubes on mine to where I'm putting Invix, the Aqua 10 or the soil supplement MS crystals. If I'm needing some traces, I'm putting that down in that tube, okay? So I'm kind of doing two things at once now. Now I'm creating an air channel, structurally, physically making an air channel, and then I'm putting bacteria there and maybe even a calcium to help keep it open, and then they can breathe for a longer period of time. Now, when I first started out in some of my pasture fields, I mean, I'll be honest, I tore the hitch out of that thing twice, okay? Because some of you have seen some of the soil tests on some I showed on my farm before. I was running 34 to 36% base saturation of calcium. I mean, you walk across the pasture fields, it felt like walking on this floor, okay? Even in the spring, after freezing and thawing, you walk across it and say, well, it's a little softer, but it's not. But now, I have twice this past year, I had my cows locked up in our sacrifice lot because I couldn't let them go out and graze or they were cutting ruts this deep. Now, that's 14 years, but my neighbors are like, what are you doing? Eating hay now. You got all this green grass up there. I said, yeah, I don't want to tear up my field. So I have a sacrifice lot that's in kind of the center of our place to where even in the summertime, they may get pulled back. The cows don't like it. They may get pulled back there and fed to where I think it's solid enough because I don't want them back out there creating compaction. They can create more compaction than cows can than what my tractor can. So that's one thing. Some of our management, talking about the balance thing, some of our management of when we let animals out there, how much we let them graze. I won't let them overgraze. I won't let them graze grass down below 4 inches because I want to cover there to protect physically when it's raining, where we get 50-something inches of rain a year. That's a lot of compaction that can be created that way that I want to keep a buffer there. So, yeah, so you gotta have to have literally a multi-pronged approach at how you do something like that. But it can be done. That's like few times I've had a vet on my place, 3 times in 14 years. He was accusing me of full feeding my mama cows because he said they were way overweight and fat. And he said, you need to cut the feed back. I'm like, they're not getting any feed. And I just couldn't get it through his head. He's like, well, they're overweight. They're too fat. And I'm like, You want me to lock him up in the barn and keep him from eating grass? He thought I was getting smart with him, which I guess I was in a way, but because he wasn't listening to me. And I'm like, just like what I was talking about the guy earlier about rolling out the hay. What do you do? I mean, it's like now I can't let my cows eat too much of my own silage, or they're getting overweight. I have to, and even some of my dry hay. And this is something interesting that happened to me. We was a little short on silage 2 years ago. I bought some silage from someone there locally. My cows would eat my dry hay before it would his Sudan grass silage. Smelled great, looked great, and we was putting out both. They would eat all of my dry hay and start bawling at us, and his silage bale was still sitting there. The animals don't know a difference. Now, then you get into the dilemma. It's like, what am I going to do with all this guy's silage? Kind of like the guy I was talking about earlier about the dry hay. He's like, what do you do with it? Well, I told him, the guy on the dry hay, I was like, well, mix you up some MS crystals. And I said, you still got some foliar supplement? Because I knew he didn't get any product this year. Yeah. I said, mix it up in a backpack sprayer. I kind of told him the ratios. And I said, go out there and spray your neighbor's dry hay when you roll it out. I said, and they should eat it. Okay, I'll try it. I ain't heard back, so I'm assuming that worked. More or less, we're kind of lying to the cows that there's more nutrition there than what there really is, but you got to do something with it, okay? Brian, do you have something?
You know, Keith was talking about the plant hormones, and he's talking about the cytokinin and auxins and the different kelps and how that can make a plant do different things as far as either growth or making its nutrients go towards seed. Another component of that to look at is your plant hormones are also going to be affected by certain elements. It's like, for example, the element calcium, and then if we look at the nitrate form of nitrogen is going to make growth. And this is the opposite of that, then the element sulfur, and then the nitrogen form of ammonia is going to make that plant go more to seed. And I had a good example of this 25 years ago. I had a fellow that contacted me and he said, I can't get any hay. My tonnage is just terrible. He said his first crop was about this tall, it was flowering out. And so I said, well, what are you doing? He said, well, I have plenty of potassium from the manure. And so what I've been doing, I've been applying ammonium sulfate to get some nitrogen for the grass and some sulfur for the crop. So actually what he was doing, he was feeding that plant so it was going to go to seed. And so all he had to do was take that away, and then he went to spraying calcium nitrate on the hay, and all of a sudden his hay went to this level, kept on getting taller. And the other thing that he noticed then is that it would tend to go to flower a lot later than what the neighbors would. So you also can affect what that plant does, not only with the plant hormones, but it also depends on what form of nitrogen you're using. And so a lot of times the industry just looks at, well, nitrogen's nitrogen. It doesn't matter if it's the ammonia form or the nitrate form, but that isn't true. You want to use the ammonia form when you're trying to have the plant go to seed, and you want to use the nitrate form if you want growth. So if somebody's in the vegetable crops and they're growing, for example, like lettuce or anything where they want growth, they're not going to use ammonia because they don't want it bolting going to seed. I just wanted to add that just so that, you know, there's also elements that are going to affect what that plant ends up doing.
One of the two sheets over here that I mentioned earlier that's not organic, that's conventional, one of them up here is a potassium nitrate, okay? It's 12% nitrogen and 46% potassium. And it's like, what is it? Less than 1% chlorine, okay? Now, I've got some fields on my farm that is extremely low in potassium, like 1.2% base saturation potassium. And it's a field that I'm trying to produce a lot of Sudan grass and sorghum Sudan. You get a lot of plant size, and those plants do like some potassium. I put 100 pounds to the acre of this product, which I'm only getting 12 pounds of nitrogen out there. And that stuff would just turn jet black green. You think I'd put 100 pounds of nitrogen on that sorghum sedan? I only put 12. But it's a nitrate. And it's oh my goodness. They got on here too, but all the tests, it's 3% sulfur. Okay? So I say that in relationship to what Brian's saying. If you're wanting forage and plant growth, stay away from your NH3 forms of nitrogen. Okay? Now, something I did not bring up when we was talking about the infix is your bacteria, your rhizobium or your azotobacter, both of the nitrogen bacteria, they're producing NH4. Okay? Whoa, that one don't work. Now, Brian was talking about how these different forms of plants respond differently. You look at these two, both of them's 1 part nitrogen, this one's 3 parts hydrogen, this one's 4. That other hydrogen makes a tremendous difference. Okay? That don't think that the NH3 and NH4, well, that's the same thing, it's just a little bit more hydrogen. How it responds to that plant is totally different. And NH4 is how all nitrogen-fixing bacteria makes it. Okay? They're taking N2 gas that's in the air, and then they're converting it to NH4. All right? That's their initial phase. They take it from N2 to NH4. If it's going to be stored long-term in the soil, talking about the nitrogen, it is then converted from NH4 to your nitrate form. Okay? So we start this, 78% of the air you're breathing right now is N2 gas. All right? So approximately over each acre of ground, you've got about 78,000 pounds of nitrogen over each acre of ground with that number, the 78%. Why is nitrogen the #1 soil fertilizer in the United States? Okay? It's crazy. All right? If we can get bacteria to take this N2 to this form, that's great. Now, point being, plants can use it in this form. If there's no plant there growing and needing nitrogen, the next bacteria family converts it from this to this. Okay? This is long-term storage. But a plant can use it like this right here. So, and I bring this up because if you got an active corn plant growing, and you put infix in your row starter, maybe you come back and side dress with some infix later on. And we've got a bunch of bacteria producing this, and I've got a corn plant out here about this tall, and when it's at that stage, corn's growing fast, right? Corn can use this form and pull it directly into the plant for its nitrogen needs. Bring this up, if you pull a plant tissue test, if you check the nitrogen content with the plant tissue, the only thing that the plant tissue test is looking at is this. It's not seeing this, it's not seeing this, it's only seeing this. So it's like having blinders on. And I say that because if the infix is producing this form and it's this form in the plant, you pull a plant tissue, the plant tissue test is not going to see any of this. It only sees this. So, that's why sometimes it makes it really difficult. So, well, I'm going to pull a plant tissue and I'm going to prove whether this infix is working or not. I've seen corn plants have extremely deficient nitrate nitrogen levels and be the prettiest green plant you've ever seen because it's loaded with this form. Now, Midwest labs can check this in a plant tissue it'll cost you, I think it's an extra $20 for them to just look for this in addition to this. Okay? Does that make sense? Same thing on a soil test. When you would get a soil test back from whoever, Midwest Lab, University of Wisconsin, or whoever, the nitrogen number on there is in what form? Nitrates. Okay? Because, like I said, bacteria is converting it from here to here for long-term storage. If you're active growing, if you're pulling this time of year, there's not going to be very much of this here. Okay? If your soils is above freezing, let's say your soil temperature is 40 degrees and you've been applying using Infix through the years, you're going to have some of this there. And if you pull a soil test, this won't show up. Okay? I'm just kind of explaining that way. Brian, you think, man, Brian's been lying to me. He's been putting all this Infix out there, and look, my nitrogen level is down at 20 pounds to the acre. Okay? So, think about that. All right? Any questions about that? Yes?
Will a corn plant hold nitrogen one year, or does it have to be
No, corn plant does not have that ability.
only legumes?
Only legumes. Your comment here. I want to bring something, a little food for thought, okay? If the people that's doing GMOs is really out for your best interest, don't you think that they would have altered a corn plant to where it could fix nitrogen out of the air like a soybean plant? Have you ever thought about that?
There's that one.
It's being
Why
worked on.
haven't they done that?
There's that one down in Mexico that does fix its own nitrogen. Somehow it makes them, it wets something and then fixes its own nitrogen over the air.
They got all these.
But it only lives down in Mexico.
They got all these different traits that they're wanting to sell farmers. Oh, we got this trait, we got this trait. I've not heard of one yet saying that they got a soybean trait in their corn plant to where it's going to fix its own nitrogen. If they're really out for your best interest, I mean, that would be the first thing that I would do. Ryan?
Even that situation, it's not really this combination of the plant and the microbe that's in part of the nodulization of like a legume. So the plant itself isn't, taking that in directly. It's through a microbe that's part of that nodule that is taking it out of the air and then it's incorporating into the plant. So it's still taking the bacteria that doesn't even have.
I'm trying to find a slide. There it is. We'll start at the very beginning of it. Now, this slide we was talking about these different forms. They're kind of like something in relationship to what you're thinking is, if I have these rhizobium cannot produce, because they can't have that symbiotic relationship with a corn plant like you can with the alfalfa plant or a soybean plant. These here, okay? Now, these, it's one reason why we put these in the infix is because now that family, your azotobacter, you put your infix down with your seed. As that corn plant, the root system starts in and takes off, these azotobacter families can keep multiplying and stay right with the root growth the whole time. Now, they do not have the symbiotic relationship like we was talking about in the sense of direct being able to feed it like the nodule on a bean plant can. But if they are there, right there, and they're producing NH4, then indirect, the corn plant's not producing the nitrogen, but that relationship, that symbiotic relationship it's talking about, can satisfy that need and can satisfy a big portion of that nitrogen need too for that corn plant too. So I guess you'd say indirectly you can have something similar to that, but, and I think that's part of like what you were talking about on the deal in Mexico. Some varieties, whether if they're not trait, just common varieties, has a better working relationship with these guys than other varieties do. Okay? That makes sense? Just like when we talk about a high oil content or a high sugar content or starch content hybrids. Sometimes when we, how to describe that? Sometimes when we get into breeding and hybridization, sometimes we breed out some of the common sense factors of a plant. Does that make sense? That some of these relationships that a corn plant should know what to do with, that we focus a corn plant so much on a particular trait that we're wanting, not talking about GMO traits, but just different like oil, sugar, whatever, that it forgets about other relationships that it can have. And I think that's part of the reason why you get a more genetically true, you get down in Mexico, there's still some, there was still some, I don't know if you can say varieties, corn, maize, that hadn't been altered in it, okay? And I will say this too, I don't know if any of you have ever messed with like open pollinated corn. Corn, if it's genetically true, over a period of time, over years, can acclimate or change to your environment on your farm if you keep your own seed. It can change and it can adjust to your farming practices. I've seen that happen. I've seen that happen starting with my dad, where he was always big on keeping wheat seed and soybean seed. Dad still liked his hybrid corn, okay? But he would keep his own wheat and bean seed. And I'll never forget it. We'd had wheat seed that we'd kept, it was at the very beginning, the first 5 years, been keeping our own seed every year, where Dad's like, we'll be a little short on wheat seed. He's like, well, I'm going to go to town and we'll get some more. The exact same variety that we had started with 4 years before, we didn't mix them. We planted up there and then we put the other one. You could see a difference. It didn't hardly look like the, quote, same variety, which it hadn't. That one had adapted to our soil condition, what we were doing, and it yielded better than the other one that was supposed to be pure new seed, okay? That I challenge you that way. I mean, don't go out and just plant everything open pollinated corn, but if you want to, you can. I'm not saying that you can't, but play with that. I mean, and it's like I've heard some people say, you should keep about 1% of your farm for experiments and trials, okay? Whether if it's seed, tillage, or whatever. 1% of your acres to where if you do it and it flops, okay, it's not a total crop failure, okay? That if you want to try like my thing with where, when I first time I got back that pasture thing, do that pasture innovator and did it. I didn't do every acre, because I was like, number one, I tore it up and got through the second field, that I was like, I don't know what this is going to do, okay? And I want to keep it limited. And the same thing, if you want to play with different seed varieties or tillage practices or whatever, and I challenge all of you, every year you should be doing a little something different. And it may work and it may not work, okay? But you should be doing something, trying something different in some way or form, just to see. And then you know, hey, that works or it don't work, okay? Being from Missouri, you go out there and look at my license plate. It says on the box, show me state, okay? There's a reason why. I mean, we have to be shown, and but farmers, and I say that, farmers in general really all should live in Missouri and have that as their slogan, because in a sense, a farmer at heart is a little bit that way, okay? And it was interesting, my next oldest son went to Israel for 3 weeks here in December, and he met somebody over there, and they asked him, said, well, where are you from? Because at home we wear the Australian style Barmer type hats. He had that, and he had a big beard and everything, and so he's, where are you from Texas? And he's like, no, Missouri. And immediately a person popped in, oh, you're from the show me state. And he's sitting there, he's like, I couldn't believe it. I'm halfway around the world and someone knows the slogan for Missouri. And so, but I say that in the sense that you need to have a little bit of a test plot area to show yourself whether something works or doesn't work. That when we go to one of these conferences and we hear all these different things, if you're not sure, try a little bit. Now, most farmers, they want to put it in the back 40 to where none of the neighbors can. I mean, you don't want to see it where Jonas can see it. Man, look what he did. Woo! But, and I'll tell this story real quick. When my dad first started this in 1979, he went back and referred a lot to a geology teacher that he'd had in college. And there was some really wild ideas that this geology teacher posed to my dad that he wanted him to do. Talking about auxins and different things like that. And then Dad's like, okay, I'll try these things. And he was throwing out the things on using gypsums and different stuff like that. Well, then the professor was asking him, he said, okay, now how's your field laid out? So Dad was telling him, which is pretty much a rectangle, 1/4 of a mile by 1/2 a mile. Down the one side, there's a county road. The doctor said, I want my plot over there by the road. Dad's like, you sure? And he said, yeah, I want to be over where everybody can see it. Well, and my dad, he's like, this is something really different. I don't know if I want to put it over there where everybody can see it. Well, Dad agreed to it. Well, it ended up being the show plot, and it ended up being to where it got tall enough a lot of times it covered up a lot of the other mess that you couldn't see the rest of the field, the other plots from the road did. But it takes a little bit of faith sometimes that we're going to go out here and we're going to try this new foliar spray, and I'm going to put it right out here at the road to where everybody can see it, okay? But I say that we should, every one of us, every year should be trying a little something different just to see, okay? It may work, don't work. If it doesn't, I don't do that again, okay? You move on. So that is one reason why I didn't bring that out, why I had the soybean program up there, and why I had the infix in that starter with the bean, is strictly for an inoculant for those beans. The rhizobium families that's in the infix, it will inoculate any legume plant that you're going to plant up here. Down my area, some of them farther south, some people plays with the grazing forage sun hemp. A sun hemp is a legume also, but I do not have the rhizobium in the infix for that particular legume plant. But anything else, cowpeas, soybeans, alfalfa, clover, is all covered in each. As an inoculant, you can use the infix if you want. And you'll be getting way more rhizobium than what you do with most inoculants. And I realize there's a lot of companies now that I don't even know if you can hardly buy from a company alfalfa or clover seed that's already not pre-inoculated with like a clay coating. I mean, about all of them do anymore. I know Byron Seed does and a lot of them do, but it doesn't hurt, obviously, as we've talked about, to have extra. So, but you could do, I've not had anyone do dry yet that I know of the infix directly on the seed of soybeans. At this point, I've not heard anybody. That's something that I would like. I haven't done much testing that way for the mere fact that I hate to do it to give someone the impression that that's the way that I would approve of doing it, that I would rather have the other components in with it.
And there's some commercial products I'll use it already too, where it is a dry product that you put in and basically mix in with soybean seed too. Otherwise, like I said before, if you had a sprayer or some liquid form, put it in, mix it up, some more beans, and mix it up.
And that's one reason why I kind of brought up the thing on that soy product over here. Your talc, and also some of your graphite products that are seed lubricants that way. I'm not saying, obviously by the pictures, it's not to say that it would could be done with the infix that way, but at the same sense, did they get some resistance from that talc in the infix not fully functioning to the full capability that it could have if they were used like a soy product.
Right.
Does that make sense? That you can have impurities and that you could have some stuff in there that could be hindering the infix that way. And that's what I just say that, like you get other additives or something like that, kind of check out what's in it or whatever. I mean, you may want to try to deviate from something that you've been using if you're wanting to put the infix in with it. Yes?
Corn seed, what they fixed in the drying with some corn seed with the treatment of fungicide and stuff that's on seed corn affected.
You are going to have some negative effect on the talc or the graphite type thing. You are going to have some negative effects of some of those commercial seed treatments with the infix. I mean, that's what they're made for and designed for. They're going to kill a portion of that in the infix. So, unless you get organic seed, if you get organic seed that way, then it's not telling you that on there. So, but that is true. That if you've got a commercial seed treatment on there, that commercial seed treatment is going to affect the infix that way. That's for sure. Anybody else? Okay. Soil structure in relationship to soil life. Okay. Now, this chart is actually in the blue book over here. When you look at this chart, this is talking about by volume. This is by volume here. About 45% of the volume of soils will be minerals. 5%. I mean, I'd really like to have 5% organic matter in my soil. Mine isn't near that high where I'm at. And then the other 50%, for the most part, is going to be a proportion between water and air. Okay, by volume. That's part of what I was talking about earlier as far as walking across the soil and it feels like a concrete floor, or if it feels like you're walking on like a thick carpet or rug. When you walk across something like, oh, it's nice and cushy. Okay, some sort, you walk across fields, you can feel that difference too. A lot of what's making that difference is this portion over here. Okay, that air content, and we need that 20 to 30% air content for soil life process, especially beneficial soil life. Okay, anaerobic bacteria doesn't really care that much about this air content. Okay, now we had a discussion back here a while ago. Any means it's got produce, or you're raising something where you've got a drip line. Okay, the specialty crop programs, conventional and organic both, you'll notice that they're at the bottom. It'll talk about running hydrogen peroxide through the drip line, like once a month, running like 6 to 8 ounces per acre of 34% hydrogen peroxide through with just water. Okay. Some of that is for disease control, because obviously, as we was talking about, our pathogen bacteria doesn't like as much air, and particularly oxygen itself. Okay. But our aerobic bacteria thrives on that extra oxygen. Okay. That if we had this room, they say we're supposed to have 21% oxygen in our air. Over the last 15 years, I haven't found any that goes that high. Most oxygen now in atmosphere is running about 18%. Okay? And the human body, for us to be able to function and think clearly and be able to function, we need about 12% oxygen in the air. All right? So if we took this room and we sealed it off and we took the oxygen level down to, let's say, 8%, it wouldn't be enough that we would just die quickly. We would kind of get fuzzy vision and can't think clear and can't do things, okay? If we have an oxygen tank here and put a mask on you, then it's like, oh, instantly, you'd start clearing up. Hey, I feel better, I can do stuff. The same thing is what we're trying to do with our beneficial bacteria by putting that hydrogen peroxide through the drip line. That if we've got a soil that we don't have enough airspace, because as we go through this and look at structure issues and different things, then I can run some hydrogen peroxide through there, and it's like us putting an oxygen mask on. It's like, oh man, I feel better. Okay? That's one of the that's an advantage that someone that's got produce, and particularly like a drip line, or even other irrigation systems, that if you can run some hydrogen peroxide with some just regular irrigation water, we can temporarily kind of overcome some of this restriction of air in our beneficial bacteria functioning correctly. Okay? So, anybody that's got produce and doing things like that, that's one of the reasons why we do that, is the hydrogen peroxide in the drip line is helping you to get more activity out of the infix that you apply by ensuring that they've got enough oxygen there to function correctly. Okay? Now, when we start talking about when we have a plant root here and we have a fine root here coming out, and we get this interaction that's happening between clay particles in the soil, or if we've got an amendment, I got supercalcium-4 wrote up here, we've got humus here functioning, and then we kind of get this organic matter that's kind of not to the humus stage, okay, that's decomposing and functioning. Now, each one of these is interacting with nutrients with that plant root, okay? And we always have to have a exchange happen, okay? We look up here, calcium coming in this example, hydrogen going back, okay? 2 hydrogens for 1 calcium, because calcium has 2 positives, hydrogen's only got 1, so we have to have an exchange. That we don't think about that occurs in the soil, that we can't just have a vacuum. We can't just have the plant pulling nutrients out of the soil and nothing going back. The plant's got to put something back. There's got to be an exchange that happens. Now, for this decomposition process to work correctly, we need a certain amount of airspace here. Okay? Now, what's going to play a big factor in that? We was talking about there earlier on our percentage of base saturations. We've got our 5 here, okay? And we kind of have a range of what we like to see. Now, I got here 10 to 14%. Really, we could broaden that a little bit, even down to 8%. Magnesium up to 12, 14% is kind of the ideal range of where we'd like to see. Now, while the soil's in Wisconsin here, it's kind of like the soil that I started with. I had 34%. So I had almost 3 times too much magnesium. Now, magnesium is an element in the system, whether it's in soils, in plants, or even in us as human beings. Magnesium is a natural puller. It's wanting to pull things together. It's wanting to tighten things up, whether if you're talking about muscle or even soil particles. So if we have an excess of magnesium, what's going to happen with how that soil particles is going to be functioning? They're going to be real tight. And when that magnesium, that excess, it's pulling it tight, we don't have as much room for our air at that point. We can't maintain that air thing. Now, when we look at these, I've got these ranges, but these 5 can only equal 100. You only have 100%, okay? We've got a pie, you can't have 110% of a pie. I mean, it's got to fit in a pie dish, okay? It's got to fit in there. That's the 100%. So, if hydrogen, I got here, hydrogen being a gas, it needs to be at 6 to 10% hydrogen. Hydrogen being a gas, if hydrogen's 0, you get a soil test and it's 0, that means 1 or more of the other 4 is too high. It could be just 1, or it could be multiple. My situation, my percentage of base saturation of potassium was down between like 1 to 1.5%. My calciums was running between 52 to 56%. Okay, so if you're doing a little bit of math here, my sodium was running under 1%. Okay, now, if you're doing a little bit of math there, it means I had a lot of hydrogen. Okay, some hydrogen in some fields, some I only had like 10 to 12% hydrogen because I had like 34 to 36% magnesium. I had way too much magnesium, all right? Makes ground tight, makes ground hard. Now, someone asked me earlier, where am I at now? Most of my fields, I'm running between 14 and 16% magnesium. All right, I'm half of where I was. That's the reason why I have to watch what I do with my animals on grazing. Because magnesium is a natural binder and tightener, I remove that. So what's that means going to happen to my soil particles? For my soil life, it's great. I got more airspace, I can hold more water. Okay, I can last a lot longer on my pasture fields compared to those around me and grazing. My fields will make it longer. But, as my dad used to say, there is some advantages to concrete farming. He'd always look at it, look at the neighbor in the cornfield in the fall, out there shelling corn, only sinking down about an inch or two. If we tried to go out there, we would bury our combine. I mean, it was like there was no bottom to the ground. That's when my dad would say, well, there's advantages to concrete farming. Well, it was at that point. We was trying to get corn out. It was nice that the ground was hard and you could go out there and run it anytime you wanted to. Now, where we could irrigate, our irrigation bill was less than half of what our neighbors was. We could soak up more rainwater. We could soak up more irrigation water, okay? So, I say that because when we look at magnesium, that's very, very important, all right? Now, there's some ratios over here. These are all in relationship to calcium and potassium that way, all right? Now, I do this to kind of give an idea. In the top one up there, yeah, it's a CEC of 12. We have a CEC of 8 and a CEC of 6. The CEC number is telling you the holding capacity of nutrients in that soil. So I've tried to demonstrate this in relationship that we have 3 different size circles because we can only have 100% of our 5 positive charged elements, okay? Now, when we have too much magnesium, see how much tighter I have the soil particles gathered in here? We don't have near as much room for any air compared to this side. The ratio between calcium and magnesiums is correct on this one. Over here I've got way more magnesium than calcium pulling it all together. Now, when we start talking about this in relationship to soil life, how much air do we have? How much flocculation do we have in our soil? That's a very important key that way, okay? Now, this is a sample. This isn't off mine. I'm trying to remember whose soil sample this is. If we look at this on our percentage of base saturations, we got to equal 100%. I always look at my hydrogen first. This is at 13.6% hydrogen, okay? Now, I said hydrogen, we like to be at 6 to 10%, so that means we got about almost twice too much hydrogen here, maybe not quite twice too much. So that means that there's extra space between the other 4, okay? We got 5, so the other 4, we go through and look for potassiums at 1.7, which that's adequate. I'd like to see it higher, especially depending on the crop. Our magnesium's at 29.9. We're almost 3 times too high on magnesium here. Calcium's at 51, okay? I like to shoot there at 74, 75%. Now look at this field here, we're at 3.6% sodium. I like to see sodium salt at 1% or less. So This situation, they're picking up a lot of salt from somewhere. That's where I start questioning the farmer. What's his inputs been like? Animal manures or different things, what's going on that we're accumulating this much salt, all right? Now, when we look at this, we got too much magnesium, which is going to pull soil particles together. One of the natural flocculators in the soil and helping to open the soil up is usable water-soluble calcium, okay? So when we look at this base saturation of calcium, we're way short. We need more calcium here. So the ratio between the two is really, really short. When we look down here at the water-soluble, here's water-soluble calcium. It's at 58 parts per million. I like to see 110 to 200. Magnesium's at 22, which water-soluble mag is kind of in range here, between 20 and 30 on water-soluble mag. If you look at the ratio, I like to see 5 times more calcium to each part of magnesium. We got 2.6 to 1. What do you this soil is just going to be run together and tight because of the excess mag, the lack of calcium, too much sodium. This is going to be tight soil. That we can't get air for your bacteria to function correctly. Okay? Now, there's something else I seen I was going to bring up. I lost it. Sulfur, that's what it was. Look at our sulfur here. We're at 7 parts per million. I like to be up at 35 parts per million on sulfurs, all right? We look over here on water soluble report. I like to see twice as much sulfur as sodium. Look, we got, I have to do some math there, a 10 to 1 reversal, not quite 10 to 1, because sulfur's 0.154 compared to 1, sodium's at 52, sulfur's at 8. Okay? I remember whose this is now. This is from up in Marlette, Michigan. This is where Brown City, matter of fact, Brown City, Michigan. This is an organic dairy, a dairy for several years. Puts lots of manure on from his deal. He puts lots of his own dairy manure on. Look at this potassium level. Where's all this potassium going? He's got potassium, because I've seen a manure sample. He's got all kinds of potassium. He's putting the manure on. Where's this going? He's losing it. It's leaching out. The potassium is. Because we've got too much magnesium, not enough calcium, and these water-soluble numbers, and the sodium is all messed up. The potassium can't even grab a hold of anything in the soil, and it's going on through with the water. It's gone. It's lost. Okay? He was having trouble raising hay. He couldn't get hay. He was having trouble with his corn. And so I got called in to try to help. We got a dealer up there, and he told me, he said, you need to go see this guy. He's like, he's never done nothing with the program. He's like, he's organic, but he's like, he's desperately needing help. He said, I'm already kind of hearing through the church group, because there's an Amish group up there. He's like, he's way short of hay, and he's trying to figure out what he's going to do with hay. I showed up and kind of looked at some soil tests that he already had before this, and it's just like, I'm like, you've got some walking on the soil and smelling of the soil, and it was just like, we got an anaerobic condition here. We got problems. And so when I seen this report, that's where magnesium is the biggest robber of soil nutrient efficiency than any other single thing on here. When we got too much mag, we got too many problems. Okay? In your hand there, Holger.
I was going to ask where the hydrogen came from.
Where does it come from?
What made the hydrogen?
The high hydrogen on that sample.
Well, anytime if you go through and add these up, someone's got a calculator, you can add these. Well, you're going to be 13.6 less than 100. So where hydrogen's a gas, I always use the analogy of a table. If we get a table, and this table here is really small, and we put chairs around it, okay? Where hydrogen's a gas, hydrogen can't take a seat unless it's open. Okay? So if we've got the table, and let's say we got 10 seats around this table, and like this here, we got a bunch of magnesium, a third of the seats is taken up by magnesium. And magnesium, because of its holding ability, is like a great big stout strong guy, and he's got a hold of the chair. Hydrogen can't get him out of the chair. Calcium can't get him out. Nobody can get him out of the chair of these. Okay? The only one that can remove mag is sulfur. Now, sulfur and hydrogen are the two things on here that are natural acids. All right? They're going to be that's where you see his pH at 6.1. See, this hydrogen is a little on the high side because it's low calcium. That's the reason why this soil is a little bit on the acidic side on that. Okay? Now, Brian?
Basically, it's coming from you kind of wonder where it's coming from, right?
Well, I'm wondering, was it a chemical reaction?
I think it's coming from the air. See, it's so volatile that when there's too much of the positive charge, it goes to the gas. And so then there's room there, that's where it comes from there. It's not really in the soil, it's an air hydrogen aspect from that. Does that make sense?
See what most of the exchanges that happens in the root zone from the plant in exchange for calcium or other things is hydrogen. Most of the hydrogen, if hydrogen has a place, a room at the table, most of it is going to come from that plant, which is indirectly from the atmosphere, because a plant always has, from the photosynthesis process, always has a, quote, surplus of hydrogen during that interaction. Okay? So when we go through the photosynthesis of having water and carbon dioxide and sunlight, we always have a surplus of hydrogen. Well, it's the way the Lord made it. It has a surplus of hydrogen for the process of being able to exchange nutrient. So the plant's moving it from the top of the plant to the roots so that we can have this exchange. Now, we can, because I have a lot of people say, well, I got 0 hydrogen on my soil test. How can I get hydrogen up? Okay? Well, we can't directly go out here and inject hydrogen in the soil. You could, but if we don't have enough room at the table for it to sit, it just flashes off and goes right back to the air.
So in reality, the plant was having consumption.
So anytime we have any active plant growing, we have this exchange process happening. Okay? Brian?
So essentially what's happening is the plant is still producing that hydrogen, but it doesn't maintain and stay in the soil. So basically it's just flashing off, so we don't get any benefit from that acidity that we normally get from that hydrogen. We can't hold on to it, so the soil never becomes acidified from that hydrogen, it gets flashed off. Where if we have room there, it stays in the soil and it drops our pH down.
So, what creates more acid rain? Burning sulfur coal or having high mag soils? See where I'm getting at? What's the two natural acids? Sulfur and hydrogen. They went after the sulfur part in regulating sulfur and said, well, that's what's creating acid rain. Down in our area, if someone needs limestone, you know what the university, you know what their first recommendation is? If you need limestone, you need high mag dolomitic limestone to put on that ground. Where I was already at 36% mag. If I would have took my soil test at the university, had 36% mag, and obviously I was acidic, I had hydrogen, they would have recommended dolomitic limestone. And it's like, why? That's crazy. But that sells nitrogen. If I want to sell nitrogen to you, if I'm in the nitrogen selling business, I want you to have your mag levels through the ceiling. You will be back, and you will buy more every year. Okay? Now, a lot of mag is there naturally. It's like in our area, it is high mag. Okay? It's naturally high mag soil. Why would the university be recommending more dolomitic limestone? And Missouri does. Missouri, as far as last I heard, Missouri has the highest magnesium dolomitic limestone in North America. And the University of Missouri loves recommending it.
By the tons.
Huh?
By the tons.
By the ton. Every fall, I just get sick at my stomach, drive around our area in the fall, and these big piles and mounds out in the field of this, looks like a bunch of rusty bolts. This rusty colored limestone, spreading it out there in the field. It's just like, oh my goodness. So, okay. Now, so does that answer your question on the hydrogen thing? Okay. Now, I've got here, are they suffocating? I'm talking about the difference between our aerobic and anaerobic. We've already kind of talked about this, requiring air and not. Now, something about your aerobic bacteria, they decompose organic matter. Anaerobic bacteria putrefies organic matter. I mean, that's the biological term that they use, putrefaction, organic matter, which produces methane gas, which is CH4, and formic acid. Both of these substances is very toxic to earthworms, beneficial fungi, beneficial nematodes. Those two substances will kill, okay? Now, we're looking about where does some of our hydrogen go? Look at methane, okay? CH4. Now, anybody went by a landfill? Most landfills, if they've capped them off, they plumb it all together, and there will be a torch out there with a flame on it, probably 30, 40 foot long. Burns 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long. That's methane. More or less, a landfill is an anaerobic digester that's producing methane that they just burn off and go back to the atmosphere. Okay? Hydrogen is very, very volatile. It's an acid, but it's also very, very volatile and has a lot of energy in it. Yes?
Quick question. I've always heard that Amish prefer high limestone soils. Is it true? For farming?
The what now?
Like the Amish community will only set up a community in areas with high limestone soils.
I will say this, a lot of Amish is really quick about applying limestone. I mean, that's been something I've seen. If they move into a new area, and I think that, and a lot of that was kind of some more, and I say older thinking, not necessarily be derogatory that way, but because a lot of older farmers, even non-Amish, I mean, even in our area, it's like if you move into a farm, it's like, well, you got to lime it. You lime it every 3 years, whether you think it needs it or not, you just lime it. At one time in probably history when ground was first being cleared, if you take a wooded area and you clear it, okay, there's going to be a lot higher percentage of hydrogen in there than what our row crop ground is, okay? That's where a lot of people, when they had new clearing ground, well, you got to lime it to be able to get a decent crop off from it, was partly true, okay? I'm not totally against lime. If I didn't say that a while ago, because I wasn't. This situation, I look at hydrogen if I'm going to be liming or not. If hydrogen is less than 15%, I do not lime. I do not recommend liming. I recommend using like a pelletized gypsum or another source of calcium. I'm not saying we don't need calcium, obviously we do. We just have to choose the right form of calcium in relationship to the condition that your soil is in. Does that make sense? Brian?
And I think you exactly hit the point. I think a lot of people have been given the information that calcium is so important in the soil, that it's been pounded into them. Unfortunately, the mindset is that I get this calcium from the lime. Like that's the only calcium source. And you forget about
My dad.
calcium sulfate, calcium nitrate. There's all these different forms that will do different things to the soil, and people don't have a lot of information, so they know which one to use in which situation. That's the biggest problem.
One of the reasons why most farmers go to the limestone is it's the cheapest per ton. Okay? Now, what Brian's saying is true. We do need calcium. I'm not going to negate that. I got one PowerPoint program in here. It's called Calcium is King. It is king of all the nutrients. Okay? It's supremely important in a lot of different aspects. But do not forget there's many different sources of calcium that you can use on your soil. Okay? Now, some of you have heard me talk about we got to use the right tool for the right situation. We don't use a hammer for everything. We don't use a Phillips screwdriver for everything. Okay? That the same thing as what Brian's talking about with calcium. There's multiple sources of calcium. If the rule we put is if you're under 15% hydrogen, look at something other than limestone as your calcium source. Okay? If you're at 15% or higher on hydrogen, you could be a candidate for using a limestone, a high calcium limestone. Okay? That's not to say that you might not could use some other sources of calcium with that limestone, but that's kind of the rule that we kind of developed was on this hydrogen and at 15%. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, I got here, your soil life is concerned about what your soil test looks like. And I think you already kind of get the gist of this, that if your soil test is showing high magnesium, it's going to affect their life. It's going to be tight, it's going to be cramped, it's going to be short of air to breathe, okay? They are concerned about what your soil test looks like, all right? Now, this slide got put. I put this over here because we was talking about earlier in the earlier presentation about the good guys and the bad guys and the amount of air content in relationship between the two, okay? Now, what about weeds? I don't have it with me because it's out of print at this point. We've had a book in the past that we're trying to get reprinted on why do we have weeds and grass. Some of you've probably got a copy of that book, had the green cover on it. Weeds also can tell you a lot about the decomposition and the soil balance structure that's going on in your soil, even without a soil test. Now this is a list of some of those that love an anaerobic soil condition. They don't like aerobic bacteria, they like buddying up with anaerobic. You talk about a symbiotic relationship like between rhizobium and soybeans, okay? There's some of those bad bacteria that's got some of these type of plants that they like buddying up with. Foxtail, I got it at the top of my list. Foxtail loves anaerobic bacteria. Foxtail seed would germinate so much stronger and quicker and faster in an anaerobic condition as an aerobic condition. Okay? So, when you look at this list, if you see any that looks familiar to your farm, should be an indication to you of something that may be wrong. Okay? Now, my farm, I had a lot of issues with thistles and nettles. Okay? They like anaerobic, which I already told you, the magnesium level, it was tight, and they like really low calcium levels. I was running the low 50s, mid 50s on base saturation of calcium. That's why, I mean, I had one field down at the other end. There was thistle plants down there, I couldn't touch the top of them. Okay? And go through with the bush hog and cut them off. And I mean, they was that big around at the base, okay? 2 years, eliminated them. Okay? I didn't use a herbicide. I'm not certified organic, but I didn't use a herbicide. But I had one patch in a 10-acre field that was about as big as this room here is. You couldn't walk through it. If you did, you would have been cut up. I mean, there was that many thistles that thick. I went in there, bush hogged them off. I come in and put like 450 pounds of supercal SO4 that fall. The next spring, I done it again. The next fall, I did another 350. Time I got to the second year, there wasn't a dozen thistles in that same area. Okay? Now, I did put a little bit of some pelletized lime. Okay? In there also, a little bit of the 98G product that Calcium Products has, but it wasn't near probably what I could have done, but I was wanting to see if I could correct the situation without using limestone. Trying to break that mentality that Brian was just talking about. Oh, you got to do lime, okay? And I'm not against lime. I mean, good high calcium limestone is really good, but there's other ways that you can fix it. I fixed most of my fields using rock phosphate and supercal SO4. And I've got a lot of my calcium levels up in the upper 60s now. They can need to be a little higher, but it's been a test time that way, okay? Now, soil structure plays a big factor in what bacteria is in control, as we've done said. It also has a big factor in what happens to the crop residue, which is automatically going to lead into disease, okay? We talked about it over here a while ago on alpha toxins and some of these other toxins that can occur in corn, okay? If I have a predominantly anaerobic soil condition to where things are not going to be decomposing, pasture and hay fields, or even row crop residue, if it is not decomposing right, any potential disease you had last year, any disease you had, whatever percentage of plant material left undecomposed this year, you have the same potential amount of disease carryover from one year to the next. All right? That's one reason why I want to break down crop residue as quickly as possible to minimize that disease factor. All right? Now, if we have anaerobic, not only is it going to, anaerobic is going to hurt and cause poor digestion, but it actually will also have a negative effect on fertilizer that we actually apply, especially if we got too much magnesium. Nitrogen, we'll go back and pick on nitrogen again. Nitrogen is one of the quickest things that can be lost in an anaerobic soil condition with high magnesium levels. You can utilize less than 50% of the applied nitrogen. That's why so many times universities are recommending so high of nitrogen levels for raising a corn crop. They realize that you very well could lose 50% of it. So we've got to put twice as much on to make up the difference. Well, why don't we figure out what's causing the problem and reduce that and make it more efficient, okay? Now, pHs. This chart's a little different. Matter of fact, Calcium Products actually put that chart in this book. Probably a lot of you is familiar with more of the pH chart on nutrients, where it's kind of the bar thing going across ways. It's wider and narrower that way. I like the way this one's laid out. When we have our soil pH, now they went down to about 5.7 and up to almost 7 here, this banded area. And we look at different nutrients, okay? This solid line is iron, copper, manganese, zinc, cobalt, nickel. So as our pH goes up, the availability is going down, all right? Now we look, here's phosphorus. We get our phosphorus availability, it keeps going up until we get about 6.5, 6.6. And once it kind of hits a plateau, and once you start getting 6, 8, and 7, you get over 7, look what happens to phosphorus availability. It takes a nosedive really, really quick. All right? So when you look at different nutrients, and if you've had issues with particular nutrients in availability in crops or in forage tests, look at a chart like this and look at it in relationship to your soil. Okay? What your soil test looks like. Where's your pH at? I don't talk a lot about pH on soil tests for the fact that if we get our soil, those 5 base saturation cations, if we get them close to the correct balance, the pH will always be right. I mean, I've never seen that not to be the fact. If we get within those ranges, you always have a pH of somewhere between 6.4 and 6.6. I mean, that's just kind of where it falls. So, when we get the availability of potassium and calcium and magnesium, see, it comes up and then it kind of hits a plateau and stays the same. Now, I picked out 3 over here: manganese, molybdenum, and sulfur. When we look at manganese, that's the solid line here. See, manganese, as our pH increases, manganese availability goes down. Molybdenum, this solid line, is different. As the pH goes up, it comes more available. The reason why I picked them 2 is because manganese and molybdenum is very important for aerobic bacteria, especially your rhizobium, your nitrogen-fixing bacteria. We need molybdenum and we need manganese flowing correctly for that soil life to function. That's one reason why I said your soil life does care what the soil test looks like. If I don't have adequate manganese and molybdenum for these bacteria to work with, and manganese is very pH sensitive. If you got a soil test and your pH is over 7, you're going to constantly be struggling in trying to keep manganese moving on the soil test and even ending up in your forages for the animal. Okay? Now, I put sulfur on there, not necessarily because of availability. I mean, sulfur is in this here, that, and it's kind of ironic that sulfur is less available over here at 5 as compared to 6. But sulfur is an acid. Sulfur itself, a pure sulfur, can have a pH down at like 4. But it's interesting that it's more available when you get up here in this range. All right? So, any comments or questions on this?
There's no exchange. If the pH is low, it has nothing to exchange with.
What, the sulfur?
Yeah, the pH is higher than the exchanges.
Partly in the sense, when we find pure sulfur out here naturally, it's always a harder substance, because when it's that lower pH in its purest form, it's making like a soft rock. But whenever we get that acid and we get it in the soil, we need the sulfur because we need it for other life processes. It can acidify the soil, but at the same time, when you get it in the ideal soil pH of that 6.2 to 6.8, it's going to be even more available, that is the case. Anybody else?
Yeah. The guy I know always mentioned that the SO4 does not change soil pH. Is that true?
Because that's a combination of calcium and sulfur.
Right. So if you're trying to change that, it's not, you have to go a different, that's not really what we're looking at is the pH levels as much as those other 5 like we're saying.
Well, it can lower pH from the sense that the sulfate sulfur in the supercal is going to grab a hold of any excess magnesium. And magnesium is a high pH, actually a higher pH element than calcium is. Okay? So, like my soils, as I was removing my mag, that's one reason why my soil pHs, even though they were acidic, stayed the same. I was putting calcium in, but I was removing mag quicker than I was putting calcium in, and my pHs stayed down at 6. Now I'm up to like 6.2, 6.3, but that's where gypsum itself has a pH of like, depends on the grade, between like 6.5 to 7 on pH scale, 7 being neutral. That's why people say, well, it won't really change the soil pH. But if it does interact with excess magnesium, it can actually lower the soil pH. That makes sense. I think I covered this on the manganese. One thing I want to bring up, I got to hear about the beneficial bacteria. If you know on your soil test, for whatever the reason, if it's pH or whatever, if we're short of manganese in your soil, and you're going to be using the Infix product, if you want to ensure that you're going to be getting optimum performance out of your Infix, and you know the manganese level is short, I would like to see some source of manganese in that spray tank with the Infix. Does that make sense? Either like the BR5 product, the TR3 product, both of them have manganese, or the straight 10% manganese that we have. If you know that you're really short, let's say you're single digits on manganese on your soil test, I like to see it, back to that soil test, I like to see on the soil test manganese to be at 15 parts per million or above.
Oh, down at 3.
Pardon?
And some down at 3.
That if you're single digits, if you're 9 and below, and then you're going to come out, like you were talking about earlier about this spring, you done your soil spray and you didn't know if you could really see as much performance, that type of a manganese level, those guys were already starving before they got going. They need this manganese for their life process to be able to multiply and function. That's why I would be running a higher rate, like myself on some of my fields, I was down like 7 and 8 parts per million. I was running a pint of BR5 per acre every time I did a soil spray to make sure that they had enough manganese for their functioning process. That makes sense? That if you're going to spend the money on the Infix, that's why I said earlier, when you get a starter, like the guys that did the dry Infix on the starter, they're over there, they're in some higher pH soils where people over-limed in the past. They got soil pHs 7.2, 7.4. Their manganese levels is pathetic. And that's why I got reluctant when they said, well, we're just going to mix the Infix with our talc and we're going to put it in the planter box. When they told me this spring they was going to do this, I'm like, this is going to be a train wreck. This isn't going to come out good. It ended up turning out better than what I was expecting it to, way better, but knowing this was going to really limit what was going to happen. I think the only thing that really helped him was he'd been doing the soil balancing thing for about 10 years prior to that. If he would have been just starting that cold turkey, never done nothing on balancing, I don't think we would have seen near the results that we did on the Infix trial. But anything else on manganese? Sulfur. Now, this is something we was talking about, the nitrogen thing over here earlier, and talking about nitrate levels on your soil test. I will say this too, in relationship to manganese. If your soil test is showing that you are less than 25 pounds per acre of nitrate nitrogen levels, and you're going to come out with the Infix product. I know it's a nitrogen fixing product, okay? But if we're under 25 pounds per acre, I would like to see enough supplemental nitrogen put with the Infix to make sure that they're starting at this 25-pound level. Does that make sense? Because most of you have dealt with rations. Nitrogen equals protein. Protein equals nitrogen. All right? Right? Brian left. 6.25, I think it's the multiplying dividing factor between nitrogen and protein. Okay? So, these bacteria, our soil life process is extremely high in proteins. That means that they need what to make those proteins to be able to multiply and function? They need nitrogen to jumpstart, get it started, get the ball rolling, okay? That's why if you're looking at, let's say, 15 pounds per acre of reserve nitrate nitrogen levels coming into spring, and you're organic, and even conventional, and you're going to come out and do a soil spray this spring on, let's say, a cover crop, I would like to have, if you're organic, have enough fish or something, N plus or something, or combination thereof, with it to make sure that those bacteria can get started like they should. Okay? Now, let's say you've got a nitrate reserve of 30, 35 pounds, and it wouldn't be that important to make sure that you had supplemental nitrogen with them. Okay? Does that make sense? Nitrogen and proteins equal. You can't really separate them. Okay. Now, we was talking about, yes?
How easily does that NO3 move on a soil test?
What now?
That NO3 number, how easily does that move on a soil test?
That would be your nitrate number.
Yes.
So, you want to know
Let's
how?
say you take a soil test in the fall, and you're looking at your equivalent pounds per acre. Going through winter, what happens?
There's going to be some factors there. Let's say you pulled that soil test and you didn't put any supplemental nitrogen and you planted rye as a cover crop. Okay? Rye is a nitrogen user. It very well, what you're saying, it very well could have ate up and used a portion, a large portion of that reserve nitrogen that's showing up on your test, could have used that up. So you're going to have to take that type of stuff into account. Now, here's the other side. Let's say you put a rye cover crop and then we put a legume in with that cover crop. Now, we can start kind of looking at it, it's like, okay, the rye may have used 15 pounds, my legume plant may put 20 pounds back in. See, that's kind of a thought process that you're going to have to kind of work through as far as, okay, you may have to get you a piece of paper and get that, okay, it's kind of like a bank account trying to, your balance is like, okay, we took this much out, we put this much in, we took this much out, and figure out, okay, this is where I estimate I'm going to be at this spring. And you may have to do some of that. I'm not really going to, I don't know how much, how would you say it? Nitrogen credits, I guess is the way to say it, I would put into animal manure if you fall applied some animal manure. And I say that because I don't want to just make a blanket statement say, okay, if you put animal manures, you can count all that as to the positive. If you got some animal manure that has a lot of bedding in it, it may zero out to where it's not necessarily going to take anything away, but it may not add anything back in. Does that make sense? To where if I have a dairy manure, a liquid dairy manure or something like that that has very little bedding or carbon in it, it's going to be more of just a supplemental nitrogen that could be added to this. Does that make sense? So everybody talks about carbon credits. I mean, there's a certain extent to this nitrogen credit thing that you may have to do a little bit of math to figure that out. That's a good question. And what you may, and here's another thing. If let's say you've got a cover crop and it's just cereal rye, okay? We get spring, and cereal rye can go from this to this, and it seems like in a week sometimes. It does in our area. The carbon to nitrogen ratio, I'm not covering that in this presentation, but the carbon to nitrogen ratio in cereal rye or some of your other cereal grains, I pick on cereal rye because it's the worst, can get backwards in a hurry. And I say backwards, way more carbon in relationship to nitrogen. To where when you put that green manure crop and you put it into the soil, you may have 30 pounds of nitrogen in the fall. You may say, okay, I've got 30 here. But then when it comes the time to doing something that my rye got away from me and it's up 16 inches tall, you may have to do a bunch of subtracting from this nitrogen number, okay? So think about that when you're doing cover crops, all right? I always like to have a percentage of legumes in a cover crop mix. just to help make sure that you don't get into this nitrogen deficit situation for the bacteria and soil life process. Okay? I'm glad you brought that up. Yes?
When the snow falls, it traps a lot of nitrogen going down. How much does that affect it?
The sulfur?
Nitrogen.
Oh, the nitrogen. That is, it's going through the...
As the snow's falling, it traps a lot of nitrogen and brings that down to the soil.
I've heard different numbers as far as on how many pounds per acre snow can add. I've heard people speculate anywhere from 1 to 2 pounds per acre, and I've heard some numbers up to 15 to 20 pounds per acre from snowfall. Well, and a lot of them says per inch is the way a lot of them break it down.
Would that be straight nitrogen? Would that be nitrogen?
Most of it's going to be more of a nitrate, because see, as the snowflakes falling through the air, it's actually picking up N2.
Okay.
And then we have oxygen that's already, we're supposed to have 21% free exchange oxygen in the air. So it could be picking up this oxygen also as it's falling through. So most of it should be the NO2, which could be more of a stable form.
So like the spring plants, when they get a little snow on them, will green up a whole lot because of the growth from that nitrate.
And I think different areas of the country is good. I think that's the reason why some people come up with different ranges on the snow, nitrogen content in snow. I think it has to do with the different areas of the country.
The forests and the Rocky Mountains, that's where they get all their nitrogen.
And so that's where nitrogen accumulations in the atmosphere, it varies. Just like pH, you start talking about pH on rainfall. Through the season, your rainfall pH is going to be different, but also different areas of the country is really different too, depending on the amount of industrialization, urbanization, everything that goes on. Okay, we was talking about sulfurs a while ago. I'm going to get a little more in depth here on sulfurs, more on the elemental sulfur like we was talking about. Now, I got into this a year ago. We had always kind of been of the mindset that if someone was going to be using an elemental sulfur, as long as it was 90% elemental sulfur, it was good to go. Okay? Sulfur, okay? In an elemental form. I realize there's different types of sulfurs, but when we're talking about an elemental sulfur, now this here is Tiger Industries, the Tiger 90. And if you look at the heavy metals test here, on this here, and you get down here, it's 97.2% total sulfur, elemental sulfur. 258 parts per million is sulfate, a very, very small percentage, okay? Elemental sulfurs is very small amount of sulfate. We were talking about sulfates a while ago. pH is 4.72, okay? In the past, Tiger 90 is one that's been used a lot, but there is other companies out here. Well, a little over a year ago, well, it's been almost 2 years ago now, the broker that we were having to buy our Tiger 90 through, Tiger Industries, doesn't let very few people work directly with them. They have brokers set up. And the brokerage company I was working with for several years got bought up by Helena. Well, I've not had a real good taste in my mouth for several years with Helena and some of the issues we ran into them with out in California. So, and they weren't being real accommodating and nice to us either from the very get start. Helena wasn't. And so I was like, we got to do something different. I went back to Tiger Industries. They wouldn't budge. Nope, you got to deal with them. I'm like, well, I'm going somewhere else. So I started researching different companies that had elemental sulfurs. And I pretty much had my head set at which one I was going to go to, and because it was kind of a family operation, still small, and that's where I was going to go. So I said, hey, send me. I was already started the process of finance stuff on setting up an account and doing everything. I said, well, send me a 10-pound sample. And I said, and I'd like to do a test on it just to have for paper. I got the results back and I about passed out. I was like, what in the world is going on? And I didn't put these in the correct order. It was this Montana sulfur, okay? I get this result back, look at the pH, 8.74. I'm like, how can I recommend this for you to use if your soil pH is at 7.2 and I want you to use an elemental sulfur to bring your pH down, and you're going to apply this and it's got a pH of 8.7, what's going to happen to your soil pH? It's going to go up for a period of time. Okay? So I come back and you look at the total sulfurs is 91.7%. I mean, it's sulfur, and you look at some of the other metals and stuff, I couldn't really find anything. So finally, we was talking to their national sales guy, and I was like, look, I said, I got a problem. I said, I got the test results back, and I said, I can't do this pH. He's like, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, it's 8.7. I can't recommend this. And I'm like, where's the pH coming from? Well, typical salesman, I don't know. We'll have to talk to one of the guys one of the tech guys in the lab. And I'm like, okay, give me an answer. And so I emailed him this result, and he's never called me back. I mean, and so I was like, okay, well, what's going on, Brian?
So, like the Tiger 90 is 10% bentonite. Are they taking something and
They're saying that they're using a bentonite too.
a different kind of bentonite that's like calcium?
Well, no one ever, and I was like, you talk to your guys, and I'm like, I said, I'm wanting to buy from you all. Because I already told him, I'm like, okay, here's how many semi-loads of Tiger 90 we're dealing with a year. And he was all excited about the business and everything. And I'm like, I want to sit down, we can have a conference call, I want to go through this. I want to get to the bottom of this. I would like to help you out. And never contacted me back.
The thing is, it almost has to be that whatever this base where this came from has had to go through some kind of a chemical reaction that has caused that pH to change compared to the stuff from Canada. So
I was like, and you can see this was in March. I mean, finally when we got to this point, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? And so I was already kind of banking on doing that. So I had, as my grandmother would say, eat crow, and went back and bought some more Tiger 90 from Helena. And so for the point, because I'm like, I can't go to this. I can't recommend this. Okay? Now, I'm going to back up a couple slides here. Here's Martin sulfur. And if you look at the pH on this one, this is 6.3. All right? They're 98% sulfur. This is coming from East Texas. This is like a pure sulfur that's mined down there, well, actually around Sulphur Springs, Texas, is where Martin sulfur is doing this at. Okay? And you look at this, I mean, we're at 250. I mean, a lot of the things is very similar to Tiger 90. You know, this one is a little higher. I don't know what quality of bentonites, and like you're talking about, Brian, I mean, I don't know what else may be involved. I can kind of live with this, but I would rather have, like the Tiger 90 at a 4 pH on trying to help lower someone's soil pH that's too high. Okay? So, here's another one. Keg River. Is anyone familiar with the Keg River company? This is the story I've been told. That the family that originally started Tiger Industries, which is up in Alberta, Canada, this the sulfur mined out of the first range of the Rocky Mountains. It got sold to an investment company about, what's that been now? 20 years ago, okay? Part of the deal was, like most business deals like that, no one in the family could get involved in the sulfur business for so many years. The way I understand it, somebody in the family went back and started this Keg River thing, and they're saying, well, this is the exact same thing as Tiger 90, it's not as expensive. This pH is 7.4. And sad to say, I mean, I got some customers over here in Michigan. They got some high pH soils. I mean, they got pHs of like 7.2 to 7.5 over around the Marlette area, over around the thumb of Michigan. There were several of them that was using this product. They were already using it before they got started with his own products, and they said, well, we're already using this sulfur. Can we use that sulfur? It's like, well, it's 90%. They sent me a label off the bags, 90%. Bentonite, looks good, use it. Well, last March, I had to call some farmers and I had to do some apologizing because I'm like, I didn't know. I didn't realize when I got this result back, because there's two of the guys that've been having troubles and they can't get anything to function right. The Infix ain't working, nutrients ain't working, they're organic, nothing was working right. And I was just puzzled. I'm like, I don't understand what's going on, why it's not working for you. Well, then when I seen this come back, then I was like, I know what's going on. If he's got a soil pH of 7.2 or 7.3 and he's putting 40 pound per acre of this on there, it wasn't doing anything. It was all sitting there. Well, remember we was talking about on the pH scale, on availability. If his soil pH is up here and this is up here, sulfurs is going to be marginal on availability. He's got a dairy, he's having trouble with animals because he can't get proteins and everything to digest right. It's because he can't get any sulfurs to function and work. Okay? So, I bring this up that I found out that sulfur isn't, elemental sulfur is not just elemental sulfur. Just because it says it's 90%, if it's not one of these that I have listed up here, you find someone else that's got a 90% sulfur product, get it checked. Okay? That's all, it's the only thing I know at this point to watch out for. Brian?
Is it a possibility then that those sulfurs that are the way they are and those pHs that high, is it somewhat like that core plant gyp that's been reacted, and so basically it's not really a reactive calcium or sulfur, and so this is just a sulfur again that's a different compound because it's gone through whatever, some kind of process in the soil or way back when it was developed or laid down that's causing it to be a completely different kind of sulfur source.
I don't know. I mean, I don't really have, and that's like the Montana sulfur thing. I was really hoping they would get back with me because I was wanting to kind of work there and try to help them to even improve their product. Say, hey, what are you trying to figure out? Is there something that you're adding that's causing this? You need to find an alternative ingredient if that's what's causing this, or if it's a process that they're doing that's doing it. It's like, hey, we need to change something. Okay?
Two comments. This Keg River product, that was common around here a couple of years ago because Larson Co-op had a hold of it. And hey, we got this elemental sulfur, it's quite a bit cheaper. So I don't know if now that it's Country Visions Co-op or whatever,
well,
I'm still using it, but just
in Michigan, I think one of the local regular dry fertilizer co-ops was carrying this. And every one of these is OMRI listed. So, I mean, Brian?
I think then the other factor is, okay, now we look at, do we have even a sulfur that ever becomes available? What ends up happening with our nitrogen used by the plant? Also, the plant can't utilize nitrogen well because it doesn't have sulfur. Who knows, maybe these 5 plants are owned by a nitrogen company.
And if you're counting on, which I don't have it in this presentation, where we talk about what you're alluding to, we want a certain amount of sulfur to nitrogen ratio for stabilizing our nitrogen. And if you're, kind of like we were talking about counting up our nitrogen credits a while ago, if I'm counting up sulfur credits for having my correct ratio with my nitrogens, and I'm applying something like this or that Montana sulfur, and I'm counting on that to stabilize it, and I lose it because my sulfur never comes active, right?
I think this comes right back to some of the stuff we've been talking in the feed industry. It comes down to the right elements from the right sources and the right ratios is more important than just some of these individual things that you're looking at. It has to, the quality has to be there. They're not all the same.
And that's the reason why I bring this up. I mean, you can buy sulfurs wherever you want to buy sulfurs at, but I just want you all to be aware, because indirectly, whether if you buy the sulfur from me or Brian, if you're going to use, wrong way. If you're going to use something like this, and you're going to use my Infix product, and like we talked about earlier about the bacteria thing, and your crop doesn't work right, what's someone going to point a finger at first? That snake oil bacteria stuff, that's just a joke. We wouldn't necessarily think, well, the co-op sold me this sulfur, that's okay. That's just the tendency, and that's why we are so concerned with the quality of inputs that you as a farmer uses, because it's going to affect soil life, whether it's the Infix or if it's your existing earthworms that's there, okay? That's one reason why we've always been so picky on sugar source. That's why I get people say, well, I'm going to just go ahead and use just feed grade molasses with your Infix. Well, I just assume not sell you Infix, because you're going to, feed grade molasses is going to be way harder on the Infix than the fungicide treatment on corn seed that we was talking about earlier, because you've got so much formaldehyde that's in that feed grade molasses, you're going to annihilate the Infix before it ever gets to the soil. Okay? That's one reason why we have always been so picky on quality controlling even other ingredients that we may not handle, because it's going to adversely affect what we're trying to do in soil balance and soil life. Does that make sense?
I just got two more questions on sulfur here. You're showing the tests up here. Your Tiger 90 sample, have you repeated that recently to make sure that the product is still the same? Because I just noticed
that was an older one. I have, but the other one was about 4 years ago. I'm wanting to, this spring, I'm planning on getting some more, because the time I got through all this process, I was into April, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, spring was up, especially spring was early last year, so I was in the middle of doing all of this while we was already sending stuff out to farmers everywhere. Matter of fact, I think by the time this test come back, Brian done had his outload of stuff up here to use that it kind of got out of hand, and I need to go back. I was wanting to get a fresh load of Tiger 90 in here this spring and go back and recheck it and see where we're at.
And the next question I had is, are you familiar with a product called Super S? It's supposedly like a faster release sulfur, like a 45-day release sulfur. All I know is that the co-op can sell it to me, and that's a more economical option to, working on like winter rye or triticale to spread in the spring, just going straight urea, and then the Super S product, then using ammonium sulfate.
Is it liquid or dry?
It's a dry product.
It's a dry.
So it's like I don't know anything about this. Where does it come from? What is it?
It
sounds great.
I would check it out, because I know some other liquid fertilizer companies. There's one, they have this, it's a liquid sulfur. They say it's a 26% liquid sulfur. That's the only thing they put on there. Well, a farmer, he bought some, he pulled a sample and sent it in. All it was ammonium thiosulfate. But they were listening on the deal, well, this is a 26% fast-acting sulfur. Well, ammonium thiosulfate is, but they were just trying to say it was something new and different when it was just regular ATS, ammonium thiosulfate. So I say that and do a little homework on it, like what we're talking about here, and can get to the bottom of it, okay? So, We was talking about the balancing thing earlier. And it's sad that we would hope that people is always honest with us in what they tell us, but sometimes they may be dishonest, or they may be honestly telling us all that they know. And it's kind of like when this sample here, and I told the sales guy and told him the pH, he didn't question me that, well, I got a sample here, the pH is lower than what you got. I said, if you got a sample of something else other than, well, I don't even really know what the pH of our product is. I just know sulfur is acidic. I'm like, but he's just a salesman, okay? Well, that's why he was supposed to went back and talk to some of his chemists and everything and then come back with me an answer, and never did. Yes.
Was that the name of that sulfur, the Yellowstone?
Is that what?
Was that the name of the brand, the Yellowstone?
The Montana?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the name of the company, Montana Sulfur.
Okay.
That's the name of their, this is kind of like a family operation. It ain't real huge. And I use that abbreviation M90. I'm trying to remember what they, I don't remember what they were called. But that's the name of the company. That's what was on the bag, was Montana Sulfur. Mm-hmm. Out of, oh my goodness. I'm trying to remember the name of the town now. It wasn't the capital. It was the other bigger city there in Montana. Anyway. But that's where it was. It was there in Montana. Okay? Now, I got one more. This is a product from India. Look at the pH on this one, 9.9. One of my zone dealers was at a commercial fertilizer show thing at St. Louis, Missouri back here, whenever that was, that was in beginning of December into November. And these guys, this company here, this, what is it, Maridi Corporation, from over here in Michigan is where they're at over here, but it's a 90% sulfur, and this is their test. This is what they sent him, because he stopped at their booth and he knew he was working through this Tiger 90 thing this past spring. And so he called me, he was all excited. He said, hey, so I found this other sulfur, and they say they are Tiger 90's main competition, and that they got their product as good as Tiger 90. And I'm like, did you get a sample? No, he's supposed to be sending me a test results. And I'm like, well, that could be good or bad, because some companies will rig samples to where the test comes out looking a certain way. That's why I always like asking for an actual sample of the product, and that way I can send it in. But this is the test results they sent to him. The pH of 9.9. Okay, now it is, where's the sulfur at? It's 93% sulfur. Well, I think why he's claiming that he's main competition with Tiger 90 is because the price that they were giving him on this was half the cost of Tiger 90. But what's this going to do? Okay, Brian?
So at this point in time, you haven't found any other sulfur source that really comes close to the pH like what Tiger 90 is.
But, Lord's gracious, the dealer, one of our zone dealers, the one that was in contact with this company, he ran into the main sales guy for Tiger Industries at that same conference. And he told him, he said, well, I'm shopping around at Sulfurs and just showing him been at their booth and what they had said and everything. And he's like, and he already knew that I couldn't get Tiger Industries to work with me, where my Zone Products and Have Solutions was already held on those database. The guy told me, he said, well, if you're going to buy sulfur from them, I'll set you up direct. Well, he left the booth, and it was Carl Schropp. Carl called me, he said, hey, we may get set up directly with Tiger 90. And I'm like, Carl, I'm from Missouri and you're from Missouri. I'm like, when I get sulfur at my place, I'll believe it. I'm like, because they hoodooed me twice on that deal. And I got a load of sulfur directly from Tiger Industries. Carl was able to got that load in. So, Lord was gracious. I've been able to cut out Helena and still be able to keep Tiger 90. I was praying awful hard over this deal last year because I was like, man, my conscience is just bothering me giving profit money to Helen. I didn't want to do that. But so this is another example of that, of potential on sulfurs. Now, something that Brian brought up a while ago on the power plant gyp. I don't have that in here, but I mean, I know we went through that. When was that, Brian? We went through that deal on all that power plant gyp. Well, it's probably been 10 years ago now, isn't it? Time flies when you're having fun. Talking about sulfate sulfur. Now, this is elemental, okay? Now, let me make a comment about this. I thought I had that in a slide. Oh, I had a gap in there. Okay, good. I don't have to draw. I'm not very good at drawing. The Lord blessed me at other things. Drawing is not one of them. Blessed my aunt and my daughter that way. I got left out on that quality, okay? Now, it takes aerobic bacteria to convert elemental sulfur into a usable form, sulfate. Sulfate is the only form of sulfur that a plant can use, okay? A plant can't use straight elemental, okay? It has to be sulfate, SO4. Is that, nope, that wasn't over there. SO4. So, and this is kind of a vicious circle thing, okay? Let's say we got a high pH soil. If we got a high pH soil, these guys aren't working very good, right? Aerobic bacteria like soil pH is between 6 and 7. If we got a pH, let's say, of 7.2, they're not working very efficient. So I'm going to put some of this on to help these guys out. But, see the circle? It's one of those things that in the past, we just kind of worked through and tried to pick up enough sulfate from other forms to try to stimulate this process, okay? Like if you're needing a trace mineral, if you're needing some zinc, or you're needing some copper. That's why, you know, a lot of times when we're making a recommendation, I want zinc sulfate, I want copper sulfate. Or if I'm needing some potassium, I want some potassium sulfate. If we got a high pH to where this isn't going to be functioning as good, anywhere we can get some sulfate, even just 3 or 4 pounds of sulfate sulfur will help stimulate this process and help them to break the elemental down. That makes sense? Now, someone mentioned something earlier when talking on humates. Okay? I don't have a slide in here on this, but humates, a good quality humate, and humates is about like the slides we just went through on sulfurs. I've seen humates, a pure humate should have a pH of like 4 to 4.5. Okay? I've seen some quote humates have pHs of 8 and 9. A dry humate. Okay? It's bad. Now, we can take a humate that has a pH of 4, 4.5, and put it down with this elemental sulfur. It's not necessarily going to help this as much as it will temporarily pull the pH down to where your aerobic bacteria can function for a period of time and help break that the elemental sulfur down to sulfate quicker. I have seen that work really good. So if someone in here has got high pH soils to where you can't really recommend supercal SO4, because if your high pH is from high calcium numbers, we don't really need to add any more calcium with supercal. Not very much anyway. That you can do an elemental sulfur with a good quality dry humate to get the ball rolling in producing more sulfates. That makes sense. That you can use humates in relationship to this to help speed this process up. Okay? Now, like I got here, I forgot I had that line on there, about 200 pounds per acre of a good quality humate will help this tremendously. Not a lot, but a little bit of humate will help that. And you're adding organic matter and carbon and other things with the humate too. So, now, some of this I already talked about, but sulfur becoming a major deficient element, and also the thing of using sulfur in the sulfate form. Now, we talked about a while ago, we kind of talked about this, bacteria using sulfate in our nitrogen, and then that's going to also affect nutrient movement and also decomposition of different type of animal and crop residue, animal manures, cover crops, and things like that. We need to maintain this sulfate sulfur, okay? So, whenever we look at, we get this circle that if we start up here at crop residues, animal residues, that we have a biological, a bacteria, soil life process that's working with these different nutrients. We need a certain amount of sulfate sulfurs. We're also needing a certain amount of nitrogen. We're talking about putting some supplemental nitrogen with the bacteria, okay? Converting this carbon and nutrients, sulfur and nitrogen, and building humus in the soil. But yet humus gives back to the plant structures for nitrogen usage and our different nutrients that can be housed and stored in the humus complex of that soil. Okay? So it's kind of like, it's this ongoing process that continues to happen, that we can add things to speed this process up quicker. Okay? Now, why do we need sulfate sulfur? Okay? Number one, we didn't talk about plants use sulfates. The soil life needs it. Our animals need it. Okay? We're going to build protein. We done talked about there's a direct equation between nitrogen and protein, 6.25, right, Brian? See, I got that right. But also in that equation between nitrogen and proteins is sulfurs. And we need adequate sulfur levels, okay? Also, we need it for fertilized stabilization. We done talked about that. Now, in soil balancing, sulfates is also really important. And we kind of, earlier we got to talk about soil test, and we kind of jumped the gun on this. If you're needing to lower soil magnesium levels, you need a quick-acting sulfate sulfur. All right? Now, if we got calcium and sulfate sulfur, we got a particle here, supercal SO4, okay? And we've got this magnesium that's in the soil functioning attached to soil particles or in humus, that the sulfate, remember I said earlier about we need sulfur in order to take magnesium out. The sulfate from like the supercal SO4 will grab a hold of this magnesium and leave the calcium in the soil. This is highly water soluble. Magnesium sulfate, some people call it Epsom salt, is highly water soluble and will leach out of the soil easily with any amount of precipitation or irrigation. That this is how you lower that magnesium level. Like I was talking about on mine, going from 34% magnesium down to 16% over like a, 4-year period that I cut that magnesium in half. This is the process that was going on. All right? That we need a quick-acting sulfate. Now I keep bringing that up because you get a power plant gypsum, there's not the fertilized label in comparing supercal SO4 and a power plant gyp is going to look almost identical as far as the percentage of calcium and the percentage of sulfur. But sulfur, when they, kind of like we was talking about the nitrogen thing over here earlier as far as what the test is looking for, whenever they do a fertilized total sulfur test, it takes in sulfate, it takes in sulfide, sulfite, okay? And just elemental sulfur. All of those is going to show up if you just do a straight calcium sulfur test, fertilizer test on a gypsum. So the thing is, you get a power plant gyp, a lot of them that I have seen in the test, less than half of the sulfur in power plant gyp will be sulfate. It's going to be other forms of sulfur that is not usable in the soil structure. And very few of them is elemental. Most of them are sulfite and sulfides, which can be very detrimental to soil life that way. So,
Does that ever get broken down into elemental sulfur?
as far as the sulfate,
The sulfites and
the sulfite, because see, your bacteria won't touch a sulfite or a sulfide. It's toxic to them. So if it's in the soil, they stay completely away from it. So it can't, it being already in the soil, it can't really convert to a sulfate or even back to an elemental sulfur. It's kind of stuck in that form. That's where, and I was trying to find, in my presentations, I got so many PowerPoint presentations on here, I was trying to find the one that Mike, with AgriKing, Mike.
Schellinger.
Yeah, on the deal where he had the people putting the power plant gyp and the supercal SO4, and he had the forage test and the soil test, that he had some people that had been using power plant gyp. The sulfur levels on the soil test came up because the sulfur number on the soil test is kind of like the fertilized. They're checking sulfate, elemental, everything, okay? The soil test sulfur come up, but the forages off from them fields were always short of sulfur. Always. And they were putting like, what was it? A ton per acre?
So I think it's an average like 11 or 1,200 pounds per acre.
Every year, trying to get the sulfur level up in the forage test. He showed up at one of Brian's meetings, and he heard what I had said about sulfates, and he waited at the end of the meeting, everybody's gone, and then he was like, if what you're saying is true, then why isn't this working? Well, he was talking through, and I'm like, Mike, there's got to be something else going on. We'll come to find out it was power plant gyp that they were using. So he talked to the farmer where they took some experimental acres, like I told you should do, applied supercal SO4, and the sulfur levels corrected with one application of, I think he did what we said, 350 pound?
300 pounds.
300 pound, and the sulfur levels in the forage is corrected, and they've been putting thousands of pounds for years and never could get it up.
Yeah.
Well, then he was like, well, what's different? And it's this usable sulfate form, okay?
Yeah, because they had, I think, 3 years or 4 years of testing with that power plant gyp. And the sulfur level in the forage, the haylage, was like 0.2, 0.21, low 0.2s. And as soon as they went to that 300 pounds of the supercal SO4, they had 3 years of test results, and it was 0.3 or above. So the sulfur went up 50% in the feed samples, even though they're using like a third or less, actually about a quarter of the amount of gypsum, supposedly.
So when you're looking at, like we didn't talk about, qualities of products, whether if it's an elemental sulfur or if it's a gypsum or whatever, that can make a difference in how it interacts in the soil and how, if it can even get into a plant. Yes?
So the SO4 versus an elemental sulfur, would that determine if you're low on calcium, you use the supercal SO4 versus the Tiger 90? Or what would be the,
As far as when to use the Tiger 90?
Right, if you need a sulfur, let's say, would you use, which one should you use?
If you're needing sulfur and your calcium levels, your base saturation of calcium levels is under 80%, I would like to use the supercal SO4. Because when this, whatever sulfur from our supercal doesn't get caught up in this mag process, that sulfate sulfur is readily available to a plant. And where it's already with some calcium, the way it is up there, it'll go in real quick. To where elemental, we got to go through that decomposition process of bacteria breaking it down from sulfur into sulfate. You're going to have a little bit of a lag time. But let's say you have some soil that's 82% base saturation of calcium. You have way more calcium than what you need. Then you'd be looking at using either a small amount of super cal, but especially elemental, just trying to get more sulfur in proportion to the calcium that you already have. Does that make sense?
Yes. But how much would you use the SO elemental? If you just put that on, how much per acre?
The elemental?
Yeah.
My thing is, I don't like applying over 45 pounds per application. Now, well, I've got some people, and we'll go back over here to Michigan, where they have some really high pHs and have some situations going on. I'm recommending them putting like 40 pounds to the acre, and if they can get out there, do it 3 times a year. I would rather see that 40, which would be a total of 120, applied 3 times, as to have 200 pounds put all down at once. Okay? Because you think about the soil life process, it's still got to go through digestion. And the thing is, if you put a bunch down at one time, it's almost like having a Thanksgiving meal and then, now we're going to have a Thanksgiving meal, but you're not going to get to eat for the next 2 weeks. Okay? I mean, that's not a healthy way to do it. Okay? It's kind of the same thing that what we're trying to do in slugging a large amount out there at one time. Now, and let me back up on something else. Whenever I was trying to go after this mag on my place, where I was talking about, I went from 34% down to, let's say, 16%. I was applying 350 pounds of Super Cal SO4 every 6 months. I would never apply 700 pounds at one time, but I was doing 350 pounds every 6 months. And that's how I brought that from that point down. Because when I say that, Super Cal, from what we've seen on doing this reaction with magnesium, is pretty much going to get used up if you have adequate soil moisture within about a 5-month period, 5 to 6 months. So that's why I chose every 6 months, instead of slugging it, going back to what you were saying on that sulfur, instead of just, I've only got time to do it once, I'm going to put 700 pounds down at one time. I'd rather just do 350 and just not do it until the next year, as to slug the 700, just because of just getting things out of balance. Okay? We as farmers, and you've probably heard me say this before, if a little dab's good, a whole lot's got to be better, right? That's not the case. Okay? That's not the case. And so, I mean, we have to watch that. I see a hand.
Another question. So we're using the Super Cal in livestock manure, putting it in the gutter or whatever. What are we left with in a chemical reaction from that?
The Super Cal.
Yeah.
That it's not really going to be as much focused on magnesium. We could replace this with put in sodium, because all the extra salts that's going to be in the animal manure, that you're going to have this similar reaction to where we're going to have free water-soluble calcium left in the manure to get attached to carbon and whatever, and then the sulfate is going to get attached to sodium, to which is going to, once it gets out in the field, it's going to be in a very water-soluble form and be able to leach out quickly, and to where it's not going to be a pH detriment to that manure there. A lot of times when you're doing that with the Super Cal in the manure, a lot of times you can count on kind of taking pHs of the manure from dropping it like 2 or 3, like from 8.2 down to 8 or 7.9 or something like that, just because of this process. Brian?
But the other thing is then, Aaron, is you're not going to have very little sulfur left for anything in the soil. You're not putting it in the manure. It's going to be pretty much spent on
Yes.
Yeah, right.
neutralizing the soil.
Yeah, I was just curious where that reaction led us there. So.
Now, elementals, it's not to say you can't put an elemental in the manure, but we can't count on that sulfate-sodium reaction to happen because, well, we didn't talk about, the elemental sulfur's got to go through its own decomposition process and whatever bacteria may be in the manure to break it down to a sulfate before this can happen. Okay? So just remember that. That's one reason why I don't recommend elemental sulfurs necessarily in manures, just because it's not going to react that quick. Okay? Now, I got a comment over here that depending on the type of sulfate would depend on what happens to the soil pH. First one I have here is ammonium sulfate, like dry ammonium sulfate. If you're applying dry ammonium sulfates, your soil pH is going to go down. Not necessarily because it has sulfate sulfur in it, but because the ammonia is going to leach the calcium out of the soil. We're going to lose the calcium. It's going to go with the rainwater and go out. And then that's going to take our soil pH down because we don't have enough calcium there to buffer it. So that's why I kind of bring this up. These three different forms of sulfates that can be used at what happens to pH. You know, we was trying to talk about earlier about, well, does supercal SO4 or gypsum, you don't really change pH. Well, typically it doesn't. If you're really low, it can bring pHs up really slow just because there's calcium there. If you're high, it'll have a tendency to bring pHs back down to its level. Okay? That's 6, 7 or so. Now, I will say this, pure gypsum has that pH of 6.7 to 6.8. Calcium products, supercal SO4, is going to run a little more acidic than that because the binding agent that they use to make the pellets, they're using lignin sulfonate, which is the chemistry word for tree sap. That it's a high sulfur content. It's like, oh my goodness, I've seen the analysis on the lignin sulfonate. It's like 5% calcium and like 20% sulfur. Okay? They're using that to make that little granular. So it's, with them using that, it's bringing the pH of that final product down a little lower than what the pure gypsum is. Just to kind of let you know that way. Okay? I think I'm getting, okay. Okay, then we talked about the calcium, that last statement as far as this calcium doing that. So, has anyone got any questions on any of that? On the sulfurs and the gypsum? They wanted to make sure. You, Brian?
Well, before you talk about we talked about the quality of sulfur, quality of gypsum, and all the other things. The other thing I wanted to mention was we're looking at like the N-Fix. N-Fix has been around, the base of that for 40 years probably. The problem I see in today's world, we have all these biologicals coming out. And so we have these companies coming out with biologicals that are genetically modified, and there's no way they're going to respond in the soil like a true non-modified element. So that's, I think, the danger part. Well, this place has the same kind of microbe pack or whatever. And in today's world, very few of those are actually going to be a quality product. That's why we're looking at the sulfur or the gypsum or whatever. So that's why we have to be concerned about what our sources are before we then use them.
What he's saying is true. I've already seen this winter 2 new biological products that's out, and on their label, where they have on their guarantee of their label, it's a bacillus bacteria, but it has some numbers at the end of it. Well, all of the bacteria that we use are, I guess you could say, public lines. I mean, it's no different than if you go out here in the soil and you're able to propagate from that soil, particular families, and isolating them, and you keep multiplying them, okay? Anytime you get a company that has numbers on there, or it has a trademark name, DOTM, at the end of the bacteria, more than likely it's genetically modified. Because that's the only way, you can't trademark, it's like my rhizobium and bacillus. I can't put that on my infix label because they're considered public varieties. I can't trademark that. Now I can trademark the name of the product, but not those individual bacteria that's in the product. There's some companies out there that's doing that. Or they're saying that a particular bacteria they have in there is patent pending. You can't do that unless you genetically altered that bacteria. Okay? So just kind of be leery of that. You get someone coming on. There's a lot of, there's new bacteria products coming out on the market every month right now. But there's a lot of them now that's genetically modified bacteria that's in it. So, and I don't know where that's going to go. So, I think I had one more slide that kind of thank everybody for everybody being attentive, and I will be around in here for a while. Hey, I actually got done on time. 3 o'clock. So, anybody got any questions or anything on anything that we've covered, or even not covered? But like I said, appreciate everybody taking the time and coming out.
Well, if you made it to this point, you are one of the pros. This is what it takes to get there, is absorbing all that information. Now, it's a lot easier when you're sitting in a room, as you can imagine, and I apologize, some of the comments from the audience, there was a very large audience there, were hard to hear because I just could plop the camera up front and sit down and enjoy, so I really didn't have a chance to work any audio. But you had a chance to really gather a lot of depth of knowledge. Well, here's the little cookie that I was telling you about. He got talking about something, took note of. I've been struggling with, when I go to apply the product, either I got to apply it at night or wait for rain. Well, some of the nights in the spring, we've lost a lot of our quality bugs around here, but we've got an abundance of the non-quality ones, i.e. mosquitoes, and they're unbearable. So that's one of the challenges of spraying at night. But I saw something, or he presented something that just took my breath away. Using an injector system, using a knife like you have on the planters, where you actually knife it in. Well, he mentioned a certain knife. I went out and looked. I says, how did I not know about this? I probably have seen them and never thought about it. So I'm going to be retrofitting a older quack digger, 3-point quack digger that I've got, and retrofitting to use the knives and mount in a spray tank, so I can go out there and I can apply, especially the N-Fix, in any matter what time of the day it is. So I'm not going to have that restriction that I've been fighting with for so long. Remember, I'm going into pastures, so I don't want to have a big trench. That knife design looked phenomenal, and from what he explained, it should work great. So that was the little cookie. Well, I thank you very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the video, and have the most wonderful evening.